studies so often gets trapped in the history box. We're also talking about geography, we're talking about culture, we're talking about economics, all of those things. But right now in kindergarten, there's no history taught. It's empty. That strand is empty. Yeah, and in most states, it's helping kindergartners understand what history is. Right. Because their history is so small.
What is history?
Yeah, what is it? And so it's like a personal heritage project is what it often becomes. You know, what's my history, family's history.
Like kindergartners, you know, they love stories, and they love to be told stories or history. So, for instance, I mean, and that's the way you can teach American history. You can teach American Revolution through story format. There's one book I just threw out. I'm sure there's thousands more where you can begin to teach and they can kind of understand and conceptualize. We were teaching about Lewis and Clark, and we had 3 and 4 year olds, and they loved it because we just told it in a story fashion. And I think that you could tell the whole history of America, or at least modern America, from European discovery to now, even in kindergarten.
Yeah,
at a level that they can understand.
Yeah, one of my favorite series is What If. There are these what if books. What if you traveled on a covered wagon? What if you lived in colonial Williamsburg?
Right.
What if you were at the signing of the Constitution? And it's all question-based, helping the children try to make relevance of that event or those series of events and why people did what. And it's that same idea. Yeah, how do you make it relational to the child?
And not to throw out a controversial person or anything, but Rush Limbaugh has his new books out, Rush Revere, Brave Pilgrims, Rush Revere, and it's seen through the eyes of a talking horse. The whole story of the Pilgrims, it's a horse, and he talks to other animals and stuff like that. So that, that's the kind of stuff that's up to teachers. That stuff, the storytelling's up to the teachers. And we can't write any standards that's going to make them.
Sure. Don't want to micromanage.
Yeah, well, we can't. You can't.
Well, but it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and you were saying, well, is this actually how kids think, or is this how we look back and think, this seems like it's really logical, we should do it this way or this way or this way, and just, I don't know, it makes me go, yeah, maybe there is a lot more you can teach the younger grades, but do it through storytelling. I'm not saying you have to tell a teacher to tell this, to do that, but if that's what the expectations were, and like weren't you talking about some kind of adding, this is what our intention was and why we're giving this is that, we're thinking kindergartners, first graders, they learn so much through hearing stories, and you don't just read the story once. I mean, my kids, the stories they love, they want to hear over and over. I mean, they can tell me the story by the time it's done, but they want to hear it over and over and over again because it's so interesting to them. And I mean, I've got a 13-year-old who can still tell me all the words to Big Bad Money because she wanted that story read all the time. And so that's how, at a young age, they can, so maybe it is thinking.
But if we look at what we can, because what you guys are, usually the story is going to come and say that's an instructional, and that's going to be local control. That's going to be, you start getting into what's actually the curriculum. That's going to come from more districts.
Well, no, I'm saying like though if we
looking at is what is the material we want those stories to be about.
Yes.
And those are kind of different things. And the other thing is, and the other question is kind of leading to go to what all of us kind of saying is that what our goal for our students in social studies is to sit and listen to stories? Is that all we want for them is to listen to stories? That's the question. So, or is there, what's that next piece? So even what are the other pieces that we want? Is, so they can listen to stories about American history, but is that the extent for what we're looking for with it?
Well, I know that I can tell you for my kids, what I want my kids to know is American history. So if it starts when they're a kindergartner and I'm reading them stories about America and our history, my hope is that they know those stories so well that by the time they get to an older grade where they're actually learning factual details and stuff, that they get it. So it's something that progresses over time rather than, they're reading a worksheet once every other week about, social studies related item. Kind of trying to somehow, instead of looking at the aspect of social studies as a sprint, we've got to sprint through this information to say we marked it on the standards. It's trying to figure out how do we look at it as a marathon integrated into the whole education of the child, just the importance of it.
But in terms of you talk about the standards, I mean, just a couple of these, grade 3, explain how the national anthem symbolizes our nation. I mean, you can start that in kindergarten. You should, in my opinion. There's another one here. Read and construct maps. And I've got a kindergartner that was doing that yesterday at home. Identify and locate the Mississippi and Missouri rivers.
Yeah, that's why we've kind
I
of
mean, that
pushed
kind of
stuff
stuff
down
ought
at
to
this
be,
point.
in kindergarten in the first grade.
Well, actually, if you
terms
look
of
at
when
the
we do
earlier
stories,
grades,
we gotta be able to tell them, we gotta be able to say that, in my opinion anyway, but, I mean, what is it, describe the Pledge of Allegiance, I mean, that ought to be down here. You ought to introduce the founding fathers, in my opinion, and mothers, by the way, because I want my little girls learning about Abigail Adams and other ones. They're down here, in my opinion. So, I think you could put a lot of that stuff down.
Yeah.
Then,
You lay a foundation.
teachers have to incorporate into the subjects because they only have scheduled time
Right.
for that.
and you've got
That's a local
schools
issue
with
again.
half-day kindergartens,
What's that?
and you've got schools with half-day kindergartens.
True. That's statewide holiday kindergarten.
Not this one.
Well, actually, there's only,
You want it?
we haven't, we just started this year.
Just started.
Yes, and the answer is yes, we
Oh,
want
it
it.
also started?
Just started this
Just
year.
started. Parents were opposed to it.
Yes, up until this year, it had been, I would say necessarily opposed to it.
A lot were.
We only had like 10 kids that chose the half day. When it was offered, there was only 10 kids in the district that chose to go to a half day. Not even that many, and by the time we got done, I think we ended up with maybe 1 or 2
That shows how.
that chose half day. So I would say there was, and I think there may have been one other district in the state that had half day. The problem is kindergarten's not mandated. And so when you start to look at some of those things, and I would say the same thing, we can move everything down, but it's gonna be done at a different level. And then what does that look like? And because if you've got a large number of kids that coming into kindergarten that can't read on their own, so then you are reading, you're having to read a lot of stuff, and you're having to figure out what those actually look like. The other piece with all of moving everything down that we're eventually going to have to tackle, not that it's a can or can't do, is if you change all of those curriculums, and Tony maybe think about this as a superintendent, but now you've got to have materials for all those teachers also to teach all that with, which is putting a budget issue. You're gonna be putting a big issue in terms of finances onto each of the buildings and all the grade levels across the district. Right, and as Craig,
It's an unfunded mandate to
Right.
say, here's the
Right.
standards, you must teach them without any
And
materials
as
to match.
Craig likes to bring up, this isn't gonna be the only one we get in a few years. They're gonna be getting 4 of these, and if everybody's changing them, then yeah, somewhere along the lines we're either gonna bankrupt a bunch of districts, or we're gonna figure out how you start to support districts. And we haven't even, as a state, we don't even fully fund the funding that we have now, so so it's, if you look at the foundation formulas now, we're not fully funded. So as you're looking at that, we're gonna have to start, that is a part of it, as we start to move things down. It's not that I can't do it for this, but the books, so if we were gonna buy these sets of books, everybody's talking about who's paying for those, if we're buying for them for every teacher in every district and every building across the state, how are all those things even getting there without any of this? And so that does become something we have to take into account.
Kathy, you're a whole harmless district.
So I'll go
Or
back
you are,
to-
aren't you, Craig, real quick, I guess you're not. They get 100% funded next year, all the harmless district.
My last issue. So we go back to how we break up 4th grade. And, Alden threw out, potentially we go developing nation up to Civil War and then add some Reconstruction on. So then you've got US, for sure, you've covered US history in 2 years.
In geography, it would look like expansion,
Right.
right? It would be the whole westward expansion sort of thing.
Would be pre,
Would be
Would
the
be-
developing,
would be, yeah.
yeah,
in that-
right?
In that,
And in economics, that would look like,
How is that different than it is now?
because in 4th grade, it's all state.
No, it's not. If you, I mean, it,
It's a empirical question, as I like to say.
it says Missouri's role in, but it
Yeah.
doesn't limit it to Missouri. I think sometimes
Our
that's the
4th grade,
interpretation.
right now is learning about the regions of the country.
I was gonna,
right now.
Right.
That's what I've never done recently.
Where you going?
At Rockwood. It's just a little bit west of St. Louis.
We do for westward expansion.
Yeah, that's
And then and I was in there earlier in the year, and we were teaching the preamble for the US Constitution.
In the fourth grade?
Like they're memorizing it?
They were actually, what they were doing was, I actually taught a lesson, because actually the teacher, she went into labor, and so she had to leave. One of our nurse drove her to the hospital while I taught the class. And so I was teaching, what the lesson was, is we went through the preamble, and they picked out words they didn't understand, and they went back through it, and they found synonyms for words they didn't understand, and then they rewrote the preamble in kid-friendly language, so they knew what the meaning of it was, so they went back through it and
except for the
read
ones that
of it. And they were discussing how it's all one sentence. They looked at it grammatically and how it became all one sentence, but then also looking at each of the words in there and making it make sense to them.
like we'll keep the cities, Kansas City, Springfield, etc. This Bradley changes in Missouri, Bradley, in Missouri.
So when they did that,
It says
my question,
it's not
did they,
No, that's
I mean, some of the words that they used back in that time have a different meaning than maybe the way we would use it today, so did you go back to that time period and?
They were just looking at this one time in that one lesson, how they went back through each of every one of the words. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not totally positive exactly how they went back through it, because again, then we get into, and we bring that back to this word, yes, but then we have to be careful not to get into instruction. So even as we're thinking about what we put, we can't get into telling people how to actually instruct students. I know the preamble, I'm pretty sure it's one of the ones that's up there for fourth grade. And what I couldn't quite figure, because I know we didn't teach it again, they teach the Constitution again in fifth grade. And so I was trying to figure out how does this, part of what I was wondering, is we just teaching this in isolation because it's there, and once we start talking about the preamble without any real context around it, and why we're talking about it, what it's there for, are we just teaching the preamble to teach the preamble, and what are we getting out of that? What's the point of just teaching this without anything else, and how does all those pieces laying up to it? So again, it comes down to what is that you want them to know from that. So I'm not sure, because I was just in there for that one lesson that day, because I just happened to be teaching it. And as I've seen, a lot of it is still Missouri history. They do a lot around Lewis and Clark. They do a lot of their exploration. A lot of those pieces do come in in fourth grade, just because it is a lot of Missouri history. But I know right now I was in there the other day and they were doing their different regions. But in terms of what the whole unit looks like, I'm not totally sure.
So you want to go round table?
Yeah, giving everybody a chance to just kind of chit chat about it. So, does anyone, let's just hear your take on it, and I'll take some notes. My computer restarted while we were away. It's having the same problem as I am. Go ahead. I'm ready now.
Can I start?
Yes.
Thanks. So my own take on it is I still like the expanding horizons model, and I would go to have this as regions of the United States, because I think it builds the consistency, and I think it would also allow us to do some of that developing nation kind of thing, taking a regional approach, and our current standards pretty much hold that, except where they just focus specifically on Missouri.
What's the difference in the second grade region to fourth grade?
So for second grade is regions of the state.
Oh, okay.
It's not where I thought it left off. I thought it was the concept.
Yeah, I figure it'll all work out, one way or the other. So when we get to grade 4, I would say before we say, okay, now let's talk about the whole United States, let's talk about parts of the United States. We've talked about our state, now let's talk about parts of our United States, and what about the history of those parts, and what about the geography of those parts, what about the economics of those parts. And then by grade 5, then we would be talking about the nation as a whole. So that's my opinion.
Aaron? I think, I would like to see us, if we're just gonna call this nation, I would like to just start moving things around and see where it takes us to. If we're gonna say that we stop at Civil War is what they did previously, we may not like that when we get things moved around. We may think we should be stopping at, like you said, 1920 or something. You know, but without actually looking at what's there, I couldn't really tell you that this should be regions or however. I mean, that would work to do it that way, but I'd really like to see it. It could be set up with just nation and nation both. You're doing the United States 4th and 5th grade, but I'd have to see it. Things like I said, just moved around before we actually made a decision on that.
I would have a similar answer to what I did for second grade, which is that this is the theme that we're still going with, for each of the same layout. Then I would say that breaking 5th grade up into 2 time periods would make the most sense. But I'm still kind of holding on some reservations about the expanding horizons, and even as we just kind of throw things around the table with regards to, because if we're talking about kids being able to understand in kindergarten American history, does that therefore mean that that goes beyond just the idea of self? School, and I do think there's something about that at one point in time kids knew what they were exposed to, but now that we've increased, I think their ability to be exposed to other things outside of their immediate concrete environment has also changed. Something we have to look at.
I'm just gonna pass. I don't really have anything.
Very good, thank you. Ryan, you have a thought?
Question, so what is expanding horizons?
This idea of you start with the child, and as they grow in development level, you can grow in terms of abstraction.
So that's what
away-
you're saying, starting with self, family, school,
Yeah.
moving to school,
Yeah.
moving to region, moving to LIC. Okay. Where did this develop from? Where did this
It's a pretty basic idea within education. For like
is it universal right now? I mean, is it the way it's done?
largely, I mean, you'll find those who don't. You'll find the thematic. We talked about this earlier. You find thematic approaches. You find looping approaches. From a child development perspective, it's definitely the approach that's used. I would say, from a child development perspective.
No question about it, I don't think. I mean, a 1-year-old can't think like I can. I'm not that swift.
So,
You don't agree with that?
I think a 1-year-old can think critically.
Yeah, oh, yeah, but not
Within their 1-year-old experience.
based on pain or reward or.
an ability to communicate.
And I would say what you just, even the experience, but what a kid experiences can be outside of what they are just concretely able to see. And so I think even in terms of just childhood, I think,
I have to argue with that.
see, I think that,
To expect abstract reasoning from a 1-year-old would be
A
beyond.
1-year-old can truly
but
believe in Santa Claus.
but like if we go back to what Ryan said, if his kids are reading stories about American history and can learn and think about American history, even if they have to make a connection with the character, that's beyond self-family school. Now you're getting into something that's more of an abstract historical time frame. You're thinking on a different level.
And ask them when that time was.
Right, but do, that's, again, so do what is it that you want? And I can say, I think that maybe expanding horizons was based on what we think makes sense. I'm not sure there's actually any scientific data that automatically says this is exactly the way kids think. And I'm not sure if we actually don't connect all of those pieces ever, that a kid actually gets that. Because my concern still is that if we're not explicit in the fact that a kid understands that they're in all of these places simultaneously, that they end up only learning about it at some point in time. We would hope would be that each year they're coming back and explaining this. But in all honesty, until 7th grade, we don't look at even just geography. I could see geography being a theme for a whole year where you talk about nothing. You could talk about geography, and maybe, I don't know how all the 7 strands would be put in there. But I'm just kind of throwing things out. I think it for me as an adult, I look at this again from an outside thing. It would make sense that as kids get older, they would understand bigger pieces. And so this to me looks like it's a bigger piece. And they would hopefully be able to understand the idea that they're all in these places simultaneously, and that they would still have the learning from the year before. But I see how it can. And I guess after we talked about expanding horizons, I had never looked about it, and I will say, so I did. I Googled expanding horizons social studies and started reading lots of things, and a lot of stuff was saying came out of the agrarian society. When people, a lot of times, what they thought of was of what they could see concretely in the 1800s. But as kids' experiences, what they've been able to be exposed to has grown the brain's ability to start to understand different things, whether it's through technology that they can now see. They can see a picture of the ocean, whereas at one point in time, to learn about an ocean, you couldn't do it without having been there, or having pictures of it, and not every kid can go see it. Now I can pull up a picture of the Pacific Ocean here, and a kid can start to at least understand what that is. But that's beyond self-family school. And so I think that some of those pieces, do we start to, at one point I was an abstract concept that we can make more concrete, I guess is what I'm trying to kind of in a long-winded way say.
Your question was about expanding horizons, is that answer?
It is, no, thank you. And, I think that, so I think maybe, from an academic or an intellectual standpoint, I mean, the concept of expanding horizons is good. However, putting it down where the chickens eat the feed in terms of actual practice, ability, and capability, and what is the purpose of social studies in the first place? Well, it's beginning to socialize, right? To expand beyond self. So, and I think kindergarten, I know a kindergartner is capable of doing it in terms of moving beyond even self, family, and even school. I also think the purpose of social studies, beyond being able to read math and understand economics and all those other things, is to really be able to teach a student or a child, at least at this level, what it is to be an American citizen, right? And that ultimately, not only do we want people to have education to lead a richer, fuller life, but we want people to be educated so that they can function within our society. So, well, there you go. So at that point, I think a kindergartner is not going to grasp, again, what it is to be an American citizen or all of American history at the level that you can. But they can certainly grasp it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to not only teach them about the self, family, and school, but in terms of, let's just what it is to be an American citizen in the context of the United States of America as it is today. You can begin to teach about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and the founding fathers at a developmentally appropriate level. I think that you can begin to teach about what some, at least the themes of the Constitution are. I think that you can begin to teach them, about some of the themes of the Declaration of Independence. I mean, all people are created equal, right? And that's in the Declaration. Kindergarten can get that, not the level that you can. And I think just in terms of like a foundational experience and understanding of what it is to be an American, I think that's an important quality, and I think that you can teach that. Begin to sing the national anthem in class. You can, do the Pledge of Allegiance, which hopefully we'll do every morning, and in so doing, teach about the flag and the pledge and all those kinds of things. And hopefully that experience is woven in to education. education as you progress through these grade levels.
And in fact, I think what we keep tripping over and over again is that some people are looking at this model, or this framework, as being only the content. And it's really not. Because I agree with everything you just said. The curriculum model can determine some of the content, but it's mostly about how do you relate that content that you think is important to the child. So everything you said, I would agree with completely. But what I would say from an educational perspective is, if I'm going to talk about what's it mean to be a citizen in the United States to attend kindergarten, I'm going to do it in a way that refers to their experience. Because for them to abstract to someone who lives in another city or someone who lives in another state is probably not going to be as relevant as if I can talk about, to be a citizen in the United States is very similar to like being a member of your family. That's a concept they understand. And so we can teach, and that's the developmental appropriateness. So when you see those categories, it's not necessarily determining what content is taught as much as it is relating it to the developmental abilities of the child in terms of what their experience tells them and what they relate to. Talk about George Washington. So there's some great books about George Washington. What was it like George Washington as a boy? Right? And that's that approach. It's the idea we want to teach about George Washington, but we're going to teach about it in a context in which the child understands it. Right. Because the child is a boy or a girl. Right?
But in terms of like creating a standard, right? If you create a standard that is implemented at the local level by the teacher that says we want kindergartners to at least have a basic understanding of who the founding fathers and mothers are. We want them to have a basic understanding of the flag. You're essentially teaching not only history but patriotism and all those other things. And I think that those are important. And to your point about map reading and some of the other stuff that I pointed out here, I think that can be moved down.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff is scaffolded in that. Earlier on, you'll see, before we get to mapping the rivers and cities of Missouri, you'll see earlier construct a map. And so that's a map of anything. Usually what we'll do is we'll start with what the child knows. You got it. Because that's what's developmentally appropriate for them, because that's something they can see, they can touch, they can relate to, versus this thing called the state. And there are rivers, other rivers in the state. The only one I know is Missouri River, So that's how
show
we
them a picture of Missouri.
You could,
and
but
a kindergartner can identify that picture, that shape is Missouri. They might not abstract like you say, but they can begin to identify.
they can create a drawing, and a drawing is different than a map, right? Because a map orientates a person in space, and that's different than a drawing. The drawing is some sort of representation, right? Because you use a map instead of locating.
So show them a drawing of Missouri,
And
and
so
they
this-
can identify that this is their state.
Yeah, absolutely, you can. Or the outline of the state, right? And so you kind of
And then
build
down
that
the
up.
road, then you can throw in the map.
And the cardinal points, directions, all the parts of a map that we really want children to be able to use. Although GPS is kind of getting rid of all that.
Craig, we've done a lot of talking, and in all of our meetings up to this point, and it seemed like one of the underlying things is the time that teachers take to teach social studies in elementary school. And we're asking a lot of questions and talking about a lot of things that aren't realistic in the current setting. And what you said, some of those basic things for a grade kind of got my attention. And that's kind of what we've done. We do the labels here and stuff like that. But we also have to follow that. Well, what is the thing you can't mention that we can't change? That
That's right.
Those-
It's those 7.
those things have to be included. That's them right there. Okay.
You can have a string that's empty. Like
Yeah.
number 3 there in grade K is empty.
So, in a realistic way of looking at it. Think, first of all, what I missed, we're not probably wasting time because we've got an issue here. We're unique from every other group up here because we're trying to create standards for something that's not even taught in some places or some grades. So we got a very unique situation here. If they are, it's every other day for 30 minutes or one semester. So I was just thinking that it would kind of neat if there was, these are themes, but these are labels, but well, if you even had some themes of some of the things you mentioned. And I
Yeah,
don't know how
those
you
are-
do that, but,
I think those are the concepts that are listed down the side,
okay,
like that I was referring to earlier, like symbols of the United States.
right,
That's frightening that it's not even taught, I mean, just as a quick aside, because what all of this social studies really leads into.
It is
It is politics and policy.
It is right.
You know, the old saying, you might not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. I mean, nothing could be truer, and the stuff that comes out of the legislature here in the state of Missouri, I would argue, probably impacts you in your daily life. One, more than you know,
Oh, we
two,
know.
more than, I know you know.
It's terrifying, and it's a national trend.
And, I mean, so that in and of itself needs to course correct.
It's a well-documented national trend that social studies at the elementary.
My
level
kindergarten,
is
first and second grade
from the
teachers.
last decade.
they just lie, they don't teach social studies. If you ask them, they say they don't.
You're being due.
I've never called them, you're lying.
Oh, no. Oh, my God.
Oh, you're, I don't need to talk like a politician on there.
Alright, so,
Disingenuous.
the question you asked was expanding horizons.
Yes.
And we talked about it quite a bit. Part of the conversation is also about front loading the story. So I can front load a lot of concepts they'll eventually understand through narrative, through storytelling, so we can front load a lot of these pieces. We just went through Thanksgiving. Well, every year we hit pilgrims and we hit.
Find it in the standards.
Oh yeah, it's not there, but we teach it every year.
All we do is talk about the early settlement of the United States.
Right, we do that
Thanksgiving
every
itself is
year.
never mentioned,
And we talk about,
and I think it's third grade.
in February, we talk about Washington every year, and we talk about Martin Luther King. We talk about,
Did you Lincoln also?
I hope we do,
Those are the two that are mentioned in the standards.
right, in the standards it mentions the two of them. We talk about Martin Luther King. So I think a lot of the stuff we do through storytelling, and a lot of that all goes back to when George Washington was a boy, or if you were a boy in westward expansion, we read stories about people who traveled the trail, and we have kids write journals every day on what it would be like if they were a child in this time period. How would they handle the hardship? How would they handle communication? What would it be like to leave your family? So I think we're doing the expanding horizons, and Alden and I would agree with you that I'm good with expanding horizons in the fact that it's just a lens where we have to make sure that kids get, the lens is what's the grounding part. Conceptually, my kindergartner completely understands what it's like to be in a family, what it's like to be in a kindergarten classroom, what it's like to be in school. Conceptually, they get that. They may not get what it's like to be an American citizen, but I'm going to relate these pieces together. I'm not going to teach I'm not going to not teach American citizen.
Right.
I'm going to teach it in the framework of this is a lot like being a classmate. This is a lot like, so when I talk about what is it being a good neighbor, it's just like being a good partner when we're going to meet. It's just like helping the person that falls on the playground. So everything I teach is in the framework of where they are developmentally, although I'm talking about many other things in the process. So I'm still good with expanding horizons because it's a framework of how kids, it's what they understand. and we hang those other pieces, it's the way we relate to things. So I'm definitely okay with the concept of expanding horizons, but we all have to think beyond, so what does that mean? We're still teaching history, we're still teaching government, we're still teaching geography, we're still teaching those things. It's just all related to, well, if I'm headed north, north in the school building would be towards the front door in the office area. North in the city of Ozark would be if we were headed to Springfield. North in the state of Missouri would be if we're headed towards St. Louis. North in the country is if we're going to Canada. I mean, you have to start with where they are.
Sure.
Go 5 faces north. Well, a kid can literally move 5 faces north. So it's all about grounding it. So I get what you're saying. And it makes sense to me. It's about really how we make it really relevant in what they know. So when we come to national here at grades 4 and grade 5, I would prefer dividing the history into developing nation. To me, that makes more sense than do another thing of region. I could be talked out of it, but that's where I am right now.
When you mean developing nation, you define that.
Yeah, pre-colonial
Pre-colonial
stage up
America.
to possibly through Civil War in 4th grade, where you would be doing some westward expansion, and which is, our 4th grade does a lot of those pieces already. And then in 5th grade, you start at Civil War Reconstruction, and you head as far as you can into the future.
So really we're moving 5th grade to 4th grade.
Right.
Essentially, everything in 5th grade currently is everything up through Civil War.
And so and 4th grade has a lot of it too, right now.
4th grade has,
Lewis and Clark.
right,
Right, but that's just more specifically from, I think that's more from the lens of Missouri history. It is in there some with westward expansion, they give a little bit of context, but in terms of just American history. Yeah, and I would say the Lewis and Clark stuff is probably when I taught 5th grade, we didn't focus on it quite as much. Part of that was because you do end up in a time crunch, and so the time period between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War does get kind of crushed together, which is when a lot of this comes in, like the westward expansion comes in that time period. But but essentially the idea for grade 5 is that it goes from up through Civil War. So I mean that would be essentially moving back.
my initial thought when I came this morning was that our goal was to get around 1900 and to break somewhere in the westward expansion piece and pick that up in 5th grade. I'm listening to arguments though that kids never get the rest of history.
They don't.
And if we try to teach it all, they still don't get it anyway, because we cover it so thinly, it never gets deep enough.
So they won't get it 6 through 12.
Actually, in 6 and 7, there's no history other than
Well,
global.
6 is
No
the
American history. There's no American history.
We skip American history in 6th grade. 7th grade, currently it's geography and government and civics. And we cover some pieces of history during that piece, but it's not wrong.
You know what might
And
be?
is that a timing thing? Is that we've only got an hour
That's
for
a
social
curriculum.
studies, the 6 and
No,
7, so we
that's
really
just-
do this,
That's just a curriculum.
And so then,
which is a local government decision. When you say curriculum, or that's
Yeah, it's like
What we're
Glees. It's
doing.
how the Glees forward out.
and it's been
has anybody heard from the folks, our
I think
counterparts, are they
they-
gonna change that, or are they gonna?
They're not, they at this point are changing the world in 6th grade. That's still the focus.
So what would be interesting?
8th grade is American history.
Yeah.
Through Civil War.
Yeah, so, 8th grade
Somewhere
American
it's
history
very
gets picked up.
scarce. I haven't been there.
What would be interesting with that
The American history at
It's
8th
not
grade.
deep.
American
is,
has a good
you said we're
reputation.
just 5th grade in, it could end
It's
with
consistent, right? You say it's pretty scary.
really, in terms of history, it could end with America's kind of end of isolationism.
Yes, if I had my,
You know, wouldn't that be interesting? Because then suddenly in
You had
6th
mentioned
grade, you're in the
before.
world.
Right.
The 6th grade picks up the kind of all the world stuff. So through elementary, they've carried up to where the United States now is really started to take on a more global perspective, which would then kind of transition over to, it'd be an interesting proposition.
I realize that our charge is only K-5, but just in terms of building, right? I mean, if you're building a foundation, then maybe I'm,
No, I'm smiling because
I don't
I'm just
mind
thinking of the other group and how they're working, it's very
Sure.
different.
and I'm a guy that doesn't mind to upset the paradigm a little bit, but, I mean, if you're building a foundation and you're doing all the things you're discussing right now, you're building up through fifth grade to a point where they're at, pre-World War I, end of isolationism, or even World War I, end of war, and then you just abruptly stop that, and then for 2 years, you don't touch it. I mean, to me,
That's the way it
developmentally,
is.
cognitively, I mean, it makes no sense. It doesn't seem like it's a good way to do it.
Well,
So,
you're not even talking about picking up at like, world history, World War I, I mean, like, my sixth grade, when they went through sixth grade, we're talking, they're going back to.
Right.
And so, talk about trying to, I mean, we're talking 11-year-old, trying to help them relate.
What the heck, the Greeks and the Romans and
Large sugar cane pyramids.
what?
Made 3.
Sugar cane pyramids. But a lot of what I'm seeing in classrooms is really looking at, here's what Greek society was like, and here's how it matches our society today. Our teachers are doing really good
And that's
connections.
great.
Looking at the 6th grade and here's what they did in Roman times,
Right.
here's how we'd see that played out today. So we're doing a lot of that.
Do you
So I
think
can,
that's a recent change?
Because I
Or
don't
do you
see
think
that.
that's a recent development in how they're doing things?
I think we have to teach social studies in calm arts time. And the only way to do that well is to have kids writing and reading and making it fit.
So they
For,
have to
for all
relate
of
it
the
to their
negative
lives.
connotations around Common Core, in our district, I've definitely seen a change. People are using social studies content more because of what those standards
Right.
expect.
The Common Core standards push us to do
Because
more.
you
of
can't
this.
get that from
Absolutely.
Junie B. Jones.
Right.
You
You're
can't use
exactly
that.
right.
And
So it has pushed us to do it more. But that's because we're teaching social studies more, because we have to do information literacy. And we don't have a good social studies time. We've given some of that time up to our TI time. So if we believe all
So
kids
you're
should learn,
I mean, is that a conversation that we could or should engage with the other group, or try to, have a, what was the term that was used before, plenary session? I mean, have like I don't even know about a joint session, and maybe you're already talking to you have a friend on the other group,
well, we've met with them.
But, I think part of it is if we look at the 7 strands.
because we're trying to like read it.
Right, but I think if we look at the 7 strands, I think part of what their concern might be is all we're talking about is, all you've talked, all we're really looking at is maybe 1, 2, and 3, and maybe some other ones, but each of if I look at the 7 strands, in some ways, each of those becomes its own class in the secondary level. So there's gonna be economic classes, so if all we talk about is US history,
Right.
what's so I think that's part of why they start to look at some of these other things, is because if we don't start talking about them, now if we just move out of world history and just want to still focus on US history,
Right.
when a kid gets to high school and they've never had world history,
Right.
how does that gonna work? And, or if we're starting to talk about other governance systems or other things outside of just one small piece, I think there's gonna be a bigger, there's a bigger role, there's a bigger picture with all of it.
Wholeheartedly agree. I mean, everything you just said, in a dream world, if I had my druthers, you build a good core foundation, at least through 6, 7, or 8 in American history. After all, we're trying to build American citizens, or educate American citizens. I think Greek history and Roman history and all those things are incredibly important. History of Western civilization, Eastern history and civilization is incredibly fascinating and important too, economics, etc. And you get to a point, I think, in high school, once you kind of have that foundation, where in high school you can begin to shift focus, once you kind of have a core foundation, to go in the world, to branch out a little bit. I don't know what it's like now, but when I graduated from high school 20 years ago, or 100 years ago almost now, I went to Blue Springs High, and that was considered a good school system at the time. I think it still enjoys a good reputation. I remember, I think we were only required to have 21 credit hours to graduate high school. Most kids, most students have their 21 credit hours by the time they're juniors in high school. And they might have a last semester in their junior year and all of their senior year, and they might just fill with electives. And in my opinion, this is our moment as a society, as a state, as individual parents, to educate our kids the best that we can and give them at least kind of those core skills and core understandings before they go on to college or into the workforce. And so, what is it that we want them to know? I mean, in my humble opinion, I don't know even understand why a school system would allow students to, let's say, get their 21 hours and then spend an entire school year almost doing nothing but electives. I mean, why wouldn't you fill it with 4 years of math, 4 years of science, 4 years of social study? I mean, this is talking a little broader here, but it seems to me that we have a real opportunity here, not just in our group, but in all the groups, to really impact. Maybe I'm a little naive.
Well, no, I think what you're touching on is something it's been a long debate in social studies. And what we have in our two work groups is really two visions of social studies. In elementary, and I think it's pretty typical in schooling. In elementary, we see the social studies as a interdisciplinary subject. That is, we think all of these should be taught because they're interrelated and they're all about people. And that's actually what the National Council for the Social Studies says, how social studies should be taught. At the secondary level, though, as Patrick said, it tends to be more content driven. And each of these contents tend to be their own little silo. So you have the history teacher. I would say that many high school or secondary social studies teachers see themselves more as a teacher of some content. They're a government teacher, or they're a history teacher, or they're an economics teacher.
Right.
And so the perspective tends not to be so integrated of all the social studies. So what we end up having is these two different kinds of systems that have to chunk together. And they've never chunked together very well. And we're looking at kind of the same thing because the other sub-specific. Now, there's an argument for why that's the case, and the argument is the same kind of developmental one, that
children can now handle, or young people, now we're talking about young people, can now handle content in a different way. And they can then go more deeply into world history than they could have when they were younger, because they couldn't make sense of it. And so there are some reasons why it's that way, other than just the love of certain content. But you've touched right on a kind of a meshing. I mean, in kind of the perfectly aligned world, it would be one sort of system throughout. And the National Council for the Social Studies, which is a voluntary organization of educators of social studies, prefers an integrated approach.
Even through second year?
They try, yeah, they encourage it, but it's not taught that way. So every history teacher will tell you they teach economics.
They don't.
It's very superficial. They're really teaching the history, the chronological passage of events.
And part of it, if you look at it, I'm thinking there's classes on all of it because it's so big. There's so much that's going to go into even the number 6, relationships of individuals and groups, institute. That's sociology.
Yeah.
Then you're getting into geography. There's economics. There's economists. So if you are an economist, you may know a lot about economics, but you may not be an expert in history, in all of history. So I think what we're kind of talking about again is, kind of what Ryan said, is what are those core pieces, and some of those most essential. What is the essential knowledge you would want everybody to have? Not necessarily all the real specifics. And I do think that the understanding with secondary is that some of this stuff, some of those foundational skills for all of these things have already been taught, so therefore
That's a
they can
very
get
good
more
point.
specific.
That's a very.
And so, because it's been taught and kids should have already learned it, theoretically they should have learned it, because each of those foundations should have already been set. The idea and the understanding is that they have the same standards, so that kids should come into them with a certain foundation already established, and therefore they're able to go to the next level. But again, if you're a world history teacher, I would say that if a kid comes into high school having not had any exposure to anything with world, that's not going to be what's best for that kid to start taking any world history classes. And as a parent, I would want my kids to know that yes, they are an American citizen, but they're also a citizen of the world. And so as an American citizen, there is something they need to understand, especially as we become more globalized, that they need to have some understanding of the rest of the world also. And so starting to understand what the rest of the world looks like and having some of that be core foundational knowledge for our children also. As we start to think about that, because and then in high school or in college, there are more specific. There's going to be full classes on nothing but ancient Greece. There's going to get into classes on just about anything really specifically as they get older. But I think some of that it comes back down to what we're looking at from those core foundational pieces. And I think if we do leave some of that out and wait until high school, that could be pretty tough.
Well, I tell you what, this probably is realistic, and I know everyone here is not going to agree with me. It doesn't make either one of us right or wrong. I think social studies and history ought to be a study of American exceptionalism. And I think that's where a lot of frustration comes from, is people don't feel like we teach it anymore. And I believe we are exceptional. And we don't teach it.
No, you're right. There's a lot of grassroots frustration with what's often called the education establishment. I've used that term before.
Not something, some people look at history as enlightenment, and that's fine too, but I mean, I know some real stupid enlightened people. You know what I mean?
What's PhDs in?
Yeah.
Poor air distribution.
I got one there. I'm good. Check. I didn't have to go to school for it.
Apparently, I was told that by a guy from Tanzania, so.
But
Okay.
that's really what sparked my interest in getting involved in this in the first place. And I feel like that when you get here, you get so overwhelmed with all this other stuff, that American exceptionalism just kind of gets lost. And again, I know some people sitting in this room, and I know in education in general, wouldn't even agree with that statement that we are exceptional. But I do, to the core, I believe we are.
I agree with you, and I think that, even if you were looking at it from a completely unbiased perspective, I think the American experience has been
Our system is young.
unique within the last 2,000 to 6,000 years of knowledge and history. In America, 200 plus years of what we call this American experience, is a very unique thing in history making. And I think not only is it okay to teach that, I think it will be our goal.
That's what my goal for social studies would be if I was emperor.
Okay, that's a very American experience.
But Ben Craig is the emperor today, so
If I was emperor, I would make you happy.
Are you trying to get us to?
But
Tanya hasn't talked.
Tanya hasn't, that's right.
And Kathy hasn't. So we're going to, Tanya,
Yes.
how would you see us dividing fourth and fifth grade?
I'm still like I was in all of it. I understand the idea of expanding horizons, and the developmentally appropriateness of stuff, because I've watched my kids, especially my youngest one, be asked to explain things that he does not have the comprehension of. He can retain the information and he can share the information, but to explain it, he's not quite there yet on some of the things, but he was being forced to be able to do that. So I understand the developmentally appropriateness of it and appreciate that. I also get concerned, like what you're talking about. It seems like the content you focus on that developmentally thing, and the content within that of being so, it feels very narrow. Because, I want my child from a very young age to have as much knowledge as is possible, to be able to, as they grow and can begin to think abstractly and start really critically thinking about things, they have something to bring to the table and something that they can challenge themselves with, something that they can expand their knowledge of. And just from experience of, my oldest started in public school in 3rd grade, there's been very little of that throughout their education, especially in the area of social studies. I mean, when I was asked to consider doing this, I was like, yes, 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 because to me, I agree in many ways with Tony. I mean, we lack big time in teaching the American experiment. I mean, it's like nothing else this world has ever seen. And, we should be boasting to the nations so that the nations all want to be like us, not because we're awesome, not the people, but the experience that has been created is awesome. We truly, we have the principle that all men are created equal. And we should be teaching that. Not, men are flawed, humans are flawed, but the idea of America isn't. It's so, I go back and I say all that because it's very hard for me to, because I feel like a lot of this is put into the content of that. And so I feel like that is very narrowing the way that, because what you're saying, the experience of what my kids have had is what you're talking about. It's a very narrow, this is the content. It's focused on the developmentally appropriateness of self in kindergarten, and they don't go beyond that, so my only concern in labeling those things in that manner is, are we going to keep the thing narrow rather than ourselves looking beyond what is it possible that they could know? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So,
For me, you put your finger right on, I think, one of the central misunderstandings that we keep falling into.
because I was doing that, but I mean, as I was listening to you talking originally, I'm thinking, yeah, but you're talking about the content of what is being taught, and that is where I think it's narrowing in many ways. That's where I think you look and you go, it seems so very, like, kids can have the capacity to, like, know so much more at an earlier age. Maybe that's not what you were.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'd also want to look at
What's that?
do like what can they do? So what kind of skills, what kind of things, what kind of problems are we asking them to solve?
What do they know?
And what kind of things are we asking them to actually be able to do as opposed to just know?
But I think I mean, do you think that it's possible that the pendulum is flipped so far from just having information, because I know you don't like the idea of just, they know this information, they can recite this stuff. It feels like, as one who has kids in school, it's switched all the way back over here to where having actual base knowledge is no longer important. It's, can you explain random things, and can you do this? And I guess all I'm saying is, it feels like instead of we have an opportunity to create something maybe that's closer to the middle, as opposed to just knowledge for the sake of it, and just experience for the sake of it, like bringing it back to where both have they're equal in significance, I think. I mean, you gotta have a way to, put into practice what you know, but if you don't know anything and you're just experiencing, there's nothing, I mean, I think that's where the disconnect so much comes along, because, I mean, my kids don't have a base knowledge of stuff to be able to connect it to anything as they're getting older. We're doing this stuff at home, teaching them. We're going through, just say, our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, to try to give them knowledge so that what they're what they're being asked to experientially do in school, there's an understanding of it. That makes sense?
And what I would say is, okay, if I go back to the sugar cube pyramids, I don't.
Waste of time.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing is not that it's a lot of experience, it's a lot of things like make a sugar. It seems like they're doing something, but it's more they're doing. What's the point of making a like? I guess as a 5th grade teacher, I had a team. My teammates, when I first started teaching in 5th grade, they did this activity where we would make a tricorn colonial hat. And they would bring in parent volunteers, and it became a whole half a day event on making a hat. And I was, so I refused to do it. The rest of my team did it, but I didn't understand why we were spending so much time so they knew what a hat looked like. So it seems like we're doing something. And it seems like kids are gonna understand what it was like to be a colonial, because now they're gonna wear this hat. And I can, and like I said, Brian and I had a whole conversation recently about how important is it for a kid to understand exactly what daily life was in Williamsburg? How relevant is that to what they're doing now? How do we take that and make it relevant to a kid? Because as a kid and as an adult, you start talking about colonial here, it's boring to me. I mean, right now, I find it boring. Unless you're gonna make it just listening. It's great, yeah, they made candles out of this, and they did this to get soap, and that's all fine, I can get, there's some interest there, but it's not relevant or important to me. It really doesn't, so if I don't know any other pieces to it. I'm not gonna go and turn on a History Channel documentary about Williamsburg just because I don't find it interesting. Somebody else might, but that's their interest, but I can say, what we're getting into is why do we do so? What are those experiences we're choosing, and how do we get kids to where the facts are actually, we're using them in a relevant and experiential manner, in which is allowing them to actually see why it's important to learn any of these things. Having kids do an experience like making a sugar cube pyramid is something that essentially they're probably taking home. And as a parent, you sit there and say, stupid project, I gotta sit here with my kids and feel like.
How old are they doing that?
That was just my, so
54.
those, so I think, yes, but it's not that experiences are bad, it's that if the experience itself is not teaching this. And I feel like so much of this is problem solving, or what kind of things can we look at and tie these to, and how is it relevant, and what's the importance of it?
By the way, nowhere in the GLE does it say students will make a pyramid out of sugar cubes. It says something to the effect of, examine the Egyptian civilization, I mean, we could look it up, and it'll specify some area.
Well, I just
But what
asked-
happens in the classroom though, is it gets translated instead of looking specifically, because if you look at how the GLEs are written, they're actually written in terms of student outcomes and expectations. And that's not things like making those kind of pyramids. What a teacher's probably doing in that space is trying to make it interesting and fun for the kids, other than just say, okay, that's what a pyramid looks like.
Or they're covering something.
Right.
So you look at it as actually like they're often actually covered it.
What would be better is if they took that standard about Egypt and coupled it with the tools of social science inquiry. And then we're not making sugar pyramids, we're doing research and presentations, right? Or we're doing, primary source documentation or something like that. And so that's why I think social studies we're really lucky in that we have that tools of social science inquiry, because it tells anyone who's really looking at the GLEs, what are the kinds of social science activities that students should be able to do to make sense of this content. And you're right, a lot of times that doesn't get looked at in the classroom. It's been in my experience that social science inquiry thing gets lost. And they look just at that discrete content area and say, this content. And then I'll do whatever I want with it.
And I have like 7 minutes and the projector.
Yes.
And I don't know which one is the projector.
Well, hey, what do you?
We're gonna get,
Can I just connect?
we're gonna get straightened out here.
Just the connection to the
Use your
projector.
HDMI or the other kind?
I don't know.
So what do you have on the side? Well, she may not need that.
I have 2 different options, so I think, I don't know.
You've got like
You're talking about
He's like this.
I call it the making
one,
Maracas.
So I have both
lesson.
available.
I had a teacher again that they'll turn in this unit, it's supposed to be a unit on researching about Mexico. And one of the day's lessons was to make, because we're gonna make maracas. And I said, well, that's a great art lesson. Now, what's the social studies content?
The first year we actually did this, and I
What are they,
probably shouldn't be saying on this.
where does the maraca play in the Mexican culture?
I
Where did
actually
it
asked the
begin?
art teacher to make
How is it
it, they made that type, so I said, well, if I throw it or wear it, I asked the art teacher, had my kids make it out of paper in their art class, as opposed to trying, and so they did it in art class.
Research them.
Absolutely, and that happens unfortunately.
Yeah.
I saw some standards the other day in one of our local schools.
I'll
That
say,
was just
my kids,
mind-boggling.
we used to do a service learning project every year. I do a service learning project in the classroom. And one of the things was like bedness. We did bedness and fighting with. But then they learned about governance, they learned about economics, they learned all these things by trying to solve
I'm
that
ready,
problem.
no, I know. No, I was just trying to share with you, Brian had sent me something that the 612 group was doing, and so this is the C3 framework document off of the NCS National Council for Social Studies site. And so it gives these dimension frameworks, developing questions, planning inquiries, applying disciplinary tools, evaluating sources, blah, blah, blah. So they kind of then developed a template that looks like this. So I'm thinking this is 6th grade. So this is just some initial draft work. And I think they've divided up courses or content, but they're doing it in the framework of that know and do. And so here you have the conceptual understandings. So here's what I would say is the content part, and they haven't got to this part yet. Does that make sense? And so what I keep trying to wrap my hands around when I keep saying, is it rich enough content? So when I first started wrestling with those ideas and first saw this C3 framework and was thinking about that in the context of elementary and moving from kind of being in charge of seeking out resources for a school district and what that would be, and textbooks are definitely not even an option on the table just from the superintendent's point of view. And so what do? So we've looked a lot into working with sources, and it takes a lot of work, but I think it's richer learning. And so this was just a training that I did actually just a couple of weeks ago with, we're reforming our social studies curriculum design team with the idea of that C3 framework in mind, because we do think the thinking is important, but I would agree with Tanya in that it overrode the content. And I think the content matters, but when I say content, I don't just mean social studies. So the first example I show them with a group of teachers is the contents of Lincoln's Pocket, because it's an easily accessible artifact. But how I would look at this differently if I were working with a kindergarten or first grade classroom versus if I were working with a 5th grade classroom. And so with a kindergarten or first grade classroom, you know, I wouldn't talk about that these were the contents of Lincoln's pockets on the day that he was assassinated. But what do the contents of the pockets tell you about Lincoln as a person? And so it's a lot of investigating, well, what is that? You know, this is a watch fob. He had 9 newspapers in his pocket. We talk about the pocket knife. Why would he have a pocket knife? All the reason. We talk about that lots of times pocket knives were used to pick stuff out of your teeth at that time. Why would he have 2 pairs of glasses? And it's amazing how many kindergartners and first graders do understand about bifocals and make that connection. You know, that my grandparents or my parents have 1 set of glasses that have 2 different, you know, so there's all kinds of rich conversations that kind of go into investigating this. And oftentimes talking about that the 9 newspapers. And so what do you think about that? Why do you think that is? A lot of times they will come to their own conclusion of it was important to him what people were thinking, not just of him, but of the decisions he was making and that kind of stuff. But then when you throw in from the Library of Congress, here are the actual pockets, you find out that's a Confederate note. And why would he have a Confederate note in his pocket? And so you can use those things for lots of different discussions. And so then in the training, we talked about using photographs with current events. If I'm going to understand Civil War Reconstruction, I really have to understand the vocabulary term Reconstruction period. And so this was, how do I tie in Civil War Reconstruction with current civil wars in the world and what's happening with that? And so those were those kinds of discussions. This was, you know, talking about Native Americans in 2nd grade. And so this was actually pulled out of a recent field study trip thing they do, the National Frontier Trails Museum of Independence. And part of this learning simulation is they're showing this series of photographs that are actually beyond the time frame a little bit because they're just when cameras came into being. But so if you were, if your family was riding by in the covered wagon and you saw tribe, what would you write back home about? Those kinds But this gets to the symbolism, what's going on in this picture, but then showing the flag in different contexts or symbols in different contexts, or how are these pictures connected to talk about symbols. Then it's talking about working with documents. So this is just about working with sources. But the way that we've started to organize our curriculum is around inquiry. So this essential question is, how was mail transported and delivered in the past? So it's first grade. But here are the clusters. This is the one social studies I can. So it combines the tools of inquiry, glee, with the community glees and how communities change over time. So this is how that I can target rolled out on the curriculum document in our district. And then these are all ELA standards that happen within this inquiry series. So here's the essential question. The first part of it is engage. So this comes just from that C3 framework. Lesson 1, what's a detective? What does a detective do? History is learning about the past. So this is background building for kids. What part of history will we investigate? How was mail transported and delivered in the past? What doing it? So the first part of the lesson, that engaging, how do you get your mail? What does your mailbox look like? How does the mail carrier know which mail is in your house? What kinds of things come in the mail? And then this is just another connecting way, though, of using sources to pull information and connect kids. So does your mailbox look like any of those mailboxes? And then these are our local, this is our local post office that sits in the center of our school district. So then turn and talk to your partner. How is mail transported and delivered today? Think about how mail gets to your home. Write about how it gets to your home. This is just integrating the ELA because we're trying to figure out a way to not make social studies separate. But I would argue that I think teachers are told all the time, integrate social studies into ELA, and I think it's the other way around, integrate ELA into social studies. So gather and analyze evidence. So I pulled 3 short videos off the Library of Congress. So this is mail, that's a video, and the mail delivery wagon comes around the corner and they throw the bag to the other wagon. And then this is one where a train comes along and they stick the hook out and grab it. And then this is one in, I think it's New York in the early, like 1903. And it actually shows a postal carrier who really is dressed a lot like Indiana Jones doing that. So now I've gathered some information in a first grade developmentally appropriate way. So now what's happening in this picture? This is actually a railway car, but they're analyzing evidence in a developmentally appropriate way. And then drawing conclusions. So this is a 4-square organizer that's often used. So how, based on the research that we've just done and the sources that we've looked at, what are 3 different ways that mail was delivered in the past? Do it in a wrap-up sentence, and then write a letter to your family that describes how mail was delivered and transported in the past, and then we're going to mail that to your home so you become part of this experience of transporting and delivering mail. What I think is really difficult when we don't have enough meaty content up there is that there are not enough connections for teachers to see. And that's the part of it that worries me in the expanding horizons part, because I'm not sure. I think that kindergartners and first graders can do this kind of thinking every day, but I'm not sure what we have up there leads teachers to these connections. And so whatever we do, I want to be meaty enough that they can see connections and they will go beyond just a checklist of the flag is a symbol of our nation, the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of our nation, and I don't want to lay it out so that it becomes a checklist. Makes sense? So
Go up to your lead one more time, or your ICANN statements. Got it.
but you could really do that 1,000 different ways. You know?
Absolutely. You chose the mail system with an inquiry, but that fits into expanding horizons. Because you're starting with what they know, and you're looking at, well, how has that been different in the past?
The first grade, the community, first grade is,
Right, I mean, that perfectly fits into what we're talking about.
I wonder if, because I think this is sort of like, this is our, what is this was kindergarten? This is our like broad description of the kindergarten year. So during that year, ultimately, this is what we hope through the social studies curriculum and the teacher bringing that to life, that this is what students would come out with. And we've kind of done that for each grade level. So this is first grade. And then second grade is actually a time when we put a time frame on it and attach some specific history in it. Even though that wasn't in the state lease, we just felt like it was important. Now, having said that, I will tell you that it's really a struggle because it's very difficult to find second grade appropriate resources about those topics. But, you know, we were talking earlier, you know, Alden was saying Thanksgiving is not anywhere in the curriculum. Well, we put it here.
Right.
So I can describe the hardships faced by the settlers in Jamestown and Plymouth. Now, teachers got really upset. This was a fourth quarter unit and Thanksgiving's in November. So that's a constant discussion. And then third grade is colonization and the writing of the Constitution. And it's broken down by the first unit in second, third, fourth, and fifth is a basic kind of unit that really rests in citizenship and getting the year started. And so in the context of getting a school year started, because those K-1-2 things mostly center around classroom and school citizenship, we just have that as a first unit. And then those things are all things that continue throughout the year because they're what you need to function well in the classroom. And then we move on to colonization, struggle for independence, the birth of the nation, and then fourth grade is westward expansion in Missouri, and then fifth grade is just Civil War, but it's broken down by causes, a nation divided, consequences, and then Reconstruction. So in my mind, I just keep, how do we get enough there that there are media enough connections that connect everything, so they don't become these isolated things.
So if you're doing Civil War and Reconstruction, do you do mapping as a part of that? Where do you find the other 7 strands, the other 6 strands beyond the historical frame?
yeah, because you started with the historical frame.
So this
from
is
grade
fifth grade. This is the fifth grade curriculum map. But so every grade level has that 5 perspectives thing as the beginning of their. So here are the essential questions for the unit. Here are the ICANN statements, and then they're coded by these 5 social studies perspectives that we feel like encompass all 7 strands. And so a teacher knows that when you're reporting out on the progress report, here's where you're reporting out under. These ICANNs go under that. And then here's where we link common resources. And then these are the focus areas in ELA during that, for that grade level. The reading focuses for 5th grade, and first quarter it's narrative. So then the second unit is informational writing, explanatory, and I mean there are huge problems with this. And I'm not suggesting by any means, I'm just trying to
Because what you're talking
convey
about
what I think is
curriculum versus standards.
essential. Yes,
You're talking almost 2 things that are interrelated but are different.
different.
Your standards translate.
And we can't
Right,
we
and
can't
right
do the
now,
curriculum.
yeah, so our standards are to kind of be universal, that then
Right.
a local area like her school district says,
you know, I see these standards, we can best meet these standards for our children by developing this curricular structure,
Right.
right?
Or
And
they
every
hand you that.
district does that.
Right. And I mean,
Or
hand
they
you
just
that,
hand you that.
And you
Just-
don't gift this.
I like your point about meeting your standards.
Wouldn't this be nice?
And, you know, I kind of share maybe a little bit of your, I don't know if the right word is concern or just maybe skepticism on this, what we have on the board here. So, and I agree with there. I like your idea about the Thanksgiving. I think you guys have incorporated that into your curriculum. You talked about it earlier. And one of the reasons I like it is because it kind of goes to your question up here, Republic versus constitutional democracy. You know, our history shows we are a republic, in my opinion. But I think it's more than just opinion. Thanksgiving, you know, your lesson there, and everybody understands eating turkey with pilgrims and Indians and feasting and all those kinds of things. But it gives you an opportunity to marry not only kind of your interdisciplinary approach. You've got history, but you've also got governmental systems involved. You've got communalism versus individual property ownership, and you've got real output in terms of what happened there. And you have a 3-year period where you had kind of a communalist society where they held all things in common, so on and so forth, and they tried to produce and they starved. And then, you know, that 3rd year in, he decided to they made the switch to individual ownership, property ownership, and that helped produce a manner harvest. And then from that point forward, I'm being very, very ethical level here, but from that point forward, they didn't want the things. And so you're talking about systems of governance and what the actual output of a political system can be, as well as history. And so, I mean, there's a lot of real opportunity to teach that, and even a 1st grader or 2nd grader can understand, you know, property and, you know, mine versus, you know, sharing, and what the balance is of, you know, sharing versus ownership and all those kinds of things. You got a lot of lessons in there in that one little example that is really interdisciplinary. So I'm not sure I necessarily have a point there other than to say I like your thought about, you know, meeting your subject and even taking what we consider is kind of like a fun little, you know, Thanksgiving Day story, and you can actually you can create a week's worth of lessons out of that, or more.
And I'm not sure that 2nd graders can understand the timeline and how many years ago this was. But I do think they
Yeah.
can understand the story
And the concepts.
and that the story was a real story.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
that
and they can memorize when the time was, so that when it comes back to time becomes relevant to them,
They've got the building
they
block
have
there.
the block that fits a piece.
but I think where I kind of struggle with when you talk about it's not just history, and I agree with that.
Which is why they gave us a year to do this.
What I
Take the
think
3.
helps relevance though, when you do have history focal points, is that I can connect bartering and trading. I can connect that easily in that time period, or I can connect taxes in colonization really easily as the beginning point of taxes. And so I don't want it to become so fragmented, but I don't want to lessen the importance of the other strands either. I agree with that. But I'm not sure
So if I was
what's
teaching
the best way
bartering,
to make it.
if I was teaching bartering and trading, I probably wouldn't like to waste my time with Bopans, you know, Native Americans. I could do a TV show that's on TV right now, or something down east, or I could just do bartering and trading and enter my bachelor's. So forcing a history perspective on this, and this is taking us way on where we should be, for me, in some ways, undermines what I really want them to learn, which is bartering and trading. History becomes this kind of superficial thing. I'm kind of forcing the framework of history on it.
But
Because
it
it's
should
my,
always be
but you're
connected to the
teaching them,
present.
I was gonna say, but you're
Just like
teaching
Civil
them
War.
that bartering and trading has been going on
Sure.
since the dawn of time.
and I could say that, but here's what's important to know. This is the difference between bartering and trading.
The only thing I would still like to see, and just normally speak more for my own children, would be an explanation of why they even know what bartering and trading, why is it important to care about that? Why do they need to know that at one point in time people bartered and traded? Because like I said, there's a lot of kids, they find the activities you do in classes, they find them fun, they get it, they know they actually do it. But I think we still need to, not that, because what I liked about the lesson is that it's teaching kids how to think. It's about how they're thinking. It's about the fact that we're starting to see different things, and we're creating kids that are actively processing information, doing something with the information, making connections. They're still learning all of those pieces that are there, but there's a connection between what they're currently doing. And then you could even tie it to, okay, so what does how do you see us communicating now? How do each of those things correspond with my inbox on my email, correspond with Twitter direct messages, correspond with how we're posting on social media? Because chances are, by the time these kids are adults, they're probably not going to use post office. So, I mean, as we start thinking about what the world these kids are in, how do we make all of these things relevant, from talking about Pony Express to a direct message in Twitter? You know, because that is the world these kids are kind of still in, and teaching them to think about this not as isolated instance. So if it's through history, if it's through this, my concern is that we see bartering and trading, so we come up with a fun activity for bartering and trading that becomes isolated from anything else, and the kids think, or what they do is they bring in toy guns. So again, last year at my school, they brought in toy guns to barter and trade, and so then I get parents calling me as to why their kids are bringing guns home from school. So yeah, so that's always lots of fun. But yeah, that's, if we just do these things in isolation, they become sugar cube pyramids or a fun bartering lesson if we're not understanding what the relevance of actually learning this information is.
So essentially, what we're going back to is why, the why. I mean, doesn't
I will say
everything go
for
back
me,
to the why?
I know that's just kind of the way I like to do things,
No,
is that I
I'm
need to
very
know that
much the same
relevance.
way, it's why.
And what is it, and I keep, what we're doing is how does what we're doing fit into, like, those themes need to fit into this overall mission. So essentially you'd have a mission for what we want out of social studies. The themes that we break down would be fitting into the overall mission. And then the specific standards that meet those things, we've gone backwards, designed from an overall mission of what we want from social studies to breaking it down by how do we best get there by the end of 5th grade, or at least start setting that foundation by the end of 5th grade, and then get very specific. But that's why, to me, whatever we're doing, I still like it to come back to why it's relevant, or we do end up with lots of pieces that are scattered all over the place just because they just sound like fun activities, or we're trying to cover.
Wow, we've done the beginning today. This is not,
Can I suggest something?
yes.
What if we just put them, just call those something for now? Because I think everybody kind of has the idea that we kind of want to figure out mood, and maybe that will help us identify those things better as we move on. Because there are some things I'm like,
Well, why are we teaching that? Why are we not teaching it here? Why are we teaching it there? Why is this significant? Why is this not in here and not seen as significant? That, if you want to call them both nation, part 1, nation, part 2, however you want to do it, but maybe keep them, again, just keep it all in pencil, kind of fluid, to be able to get that done and move on.
Yeah. I'm fine with that. It seems like, as I listen, we need to get through 7 and get to where we're actually moving things around. Where people, so we can look at to make sure, well, this does fit this way, or the way we're thinking about this won't fit for the 12 people who are here off and on. So if we call them both nation for now, and then we start thinking about how will we finish 7. Hopefully you're at almost 3. The goal is to be done today around 4.
We got a basketball game to make tonight.
Yeah.
Not for me. Back to St. Louis. Okay.
So I would love to finish 7. Call these both nation, and then start tomorrow looking at the other strands and how they might fit or not fit. Okay, does that sound good?
Sounds good.
people need a few minute break?
Yes, I need to use that.
Okay, so how about we start at 3? It's 2:53 right now, is what I have.
Can you pull up what we have done already on
Yes,
tools
it's right here.
on the screen?
Yep.
Thank you.
Does anybody know, is the cafeteria downstairs open, like all afternoon, or is it closed? Like, is there a
I'm
vending
willing to go
machine?
find out though.
Yeah.
Well, there's snacks here. Feel free to peruse what I have.
You brought phones. Thank you.
I try.
What phone is that? I think that's like a,
It's
what's the
iPhone
big iPad?
6.
Golly.
Yeah, it's
That's a
the
6
it's
Plus.
the
That's
6
a
Plus.
6.
And it's both, it's the same size as the Galaxy. That's the name of it.
Those are all those
Yeah.
things.
My,
That's my 5S.
yeah.
Wow, that's-
so with these, I was going like this all the time.
Mhm.
And so this is larger.
Yeah.
I'm telling people, so now I can text and drive again. I couldn't do that for a while.
That's because he's too busy watching movies. If you actually know what you're doing. He's usually too busy in the car watching movies.
Oh, Netflix on the iPhone on your phone.
Absolutely. It's really good.
I had a friend who needed to drive
All the time, this part.
she was going on trips.
Okay.
Yeah. And I drove an hour to work every day.
Yeah.
But many, many times, it was, there weren't cars around.
Great.
I was on open road, headed through,
Yes.
so I read a lot.
Yes.
I try not to do that as much anymore.
I was gonna, I don't want you to stop and do this right now either,
Okay,
but
perfect.
when you get a chance, if you, this part, I didn't include any of this last year, but I don't know, I'm just like, with the Kenai, what's most important to include and certainly what to take out.
Okay,
I appreciate it.
and. Okay. Hey, so,
If we can come to consensus though, at some, the consensus part is the hardest part.
It
So if we can just come to
We needed to
consensus,
talk
the rest
through
of the
this.
work will
right,
follow
we needed
automatically.
to talk through this, but man, we keep going back and
To
forth,
the
back and forth,
same.
back and forth. I am fine doing it either anyway. I think when we start playing with history, that will give us a better framework of how all this fits.
Everything else.
And I know that Alton does not like to think of it as history, but I view all social studies to be historical.
Mhm.
It's just the way I think. So
And
I'm,
I do like, as Ryan was talking, I think there's lots of possibilities. I don't think you can necessarily understand it in the context of a historical time frame, but I do think you can understand historical figures very early, and work with that through literature. And I don't think there's enough richness there right now. So I would love to see more, if we decide who is really important to know about, that we, as a country, who is really important to know
Yeah, because
about.
there's only 2 named people right now.
right, and we need more than
Or
that.
3 actually.
Right,
Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and MLK Jr.
In the
Right.
younger
Except in
grades,
the-
yeah.
except-
Jefferson comes in at some point.
Yeah, eventually about, I think, 4th grade with the Missouri.
Mhm.
And then you get all the famous Missourians
That's very
or
sweet, yeah.
significant people to Missouri.
Right,
are you
I
doing
think
lunch
there's-
supper tonight?
I can.
Probably can.
Okay.
Get some work done, I'd like to go for a run. Jefferson City is not fun to run in case somebody is wondering.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Everything's a hill.
And where I grew up in Kentucky, the same way. I used to have huge calves. We just,
Run uphill.
yeah,
Run uphill, but
I lived at the top of the hill, a mile.
I like cold weather.
Oh, do you?
I like to
I
run in
hate
cold
running
weather.
in cold weather.
So I'm brought my gear. go
Hey,
for a run.
running through.
I love it. I hurt my foot 2 years ago though. Never recovered.
I've had both my hips scoped and surgery in both my hips. Now they're talking about injecting stem cells into, they take it out of your bone marrow and then they inject either that or plasma rich plasma that they take out.
It's very good. Have you lost all the cartilage?
It keeps getting torn up. Like I have labrum tears and stuff in there, and I can deal with it now. But
Yeah, I've spent almost 2 years trying to recover from plantar fasciitis.
oh yeah,
It is horrible.
you should you have a doctor?
Yeah.
Who do you see?
I've seen Washi Orthopedic place on 64.
Okay.
Yeah, and they got me. I'm almost ready. I started jogging again. I put in 2 miles the other day on a treadmill. Came off, felt fine, a little sore the next day. But that's finally got
What,
it.
do they have like doing stuff at home? Like, get like a,
Yeah.
do you try the sock?
I got it
The
all.
Strasbourg sock?
I got it all. I've got everything. It's ridiculous.
They've got this doctor I see now. He's off of, he's in the Valley. And it's more of a chiropractor, sports medicine. You know, he does, but they use this, he does 2 things. One's called like active release technology, which is techniques. And this other thing is Graston, which is, the idea, the theory is that they actually go in and they use like metal tools to break stuff up in there. They break up scar tissue, they break up all the stuff. But they use like these metal and they scrape and then what they actually want to do is they want to cause bruising.
Yeah.
Because it brings blood to the area which causes it to heal.
Yeah.
And so like I'll go ahead and see him and I'll come out like I did one in the back of my hamstring that it was like this big and it was all big massive bruising. But then they also he gave me this, it's called a cryo ball.
Okay.
It's this ball that you keep in the freezer.
Yeah.
And
So I
then
use a water bottle, a
yeah,
frozen water
and,
bottle.
but and then
for my foot.
but it's like it's hard. Cause I had one of those I was using when I had
Yeah.
cause I roll like foam rollers and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then and you can like just like sit on it and it stays cold for like 2 or 3 hours. But and it's and you can since it's just a round ball, you can like pinpoint
In fact, you
areas.
have to, right?
Oh, I mean
You
it's
kinda.
yeah, like
Oh,
he
yeah.
says one of the best ways to use it is that when I was really sore like in the hamstrings area, just put it in the car. I'll take it with me to work and sit and just use it sitting on it in the car. And it pushes right where it's supposed, and it's cold. And then I get scoop, I throw it in the freezer, take it back out when I go home. But that was a pretty.
It's taken me forever, and I've had enough surgeries and injuries. This is the one that's lasted the longest.
Yeah.
Because it's just that soft tissue
So, yeah.
in that that place that you're on
Yep.
all the time.
I had. It never got real bad, but I had it for and all the time you walk
I
and
think to
everything.
myself, I came back from a trip, I'd been gone, and I was wearing like dress shoes for 2 weeks in Warsaw, Poland, walking concrete every day, all day. And I didn't take any other shoes, because I wasn't expecting to do that much walking. And I came back, I go, man, I've been eating a lot of sausage and granola up here, I better hit the road. So I would go out and cook 4 miles. Kind of hurts. My wife's like, oh, you better take it easy. No, I'm fine. Then the next day, same thing, couldn't walk. I don't even remember, it's like one leg at that point. And it's taken almost 2 years to recover. Plantar fasciitis. What?
Is it right in between your heel and your arch?
Yeah,
It's
for
actually-
me,
it's
it's just the heel.
Yeah, it's usually it's just that fascia muscle that
Yeah.
runs from from the arch of your foot, underneath the arch of your foot back to your heel, and it tears and it starts to rip at where it connects at your heel.
Yeah, and that's where it
Mine's actually just starting to hurt. Like I used to be able to like go run.
Yeah.
Now I can run.
That's exactly what happened to
But
me.
sometimes once I start walking, it starts to feel better. But like if I stand for a while,
Yeah, that's it.
Or I sleep
You
on
got
it,
it. That's
I
the
get out of bed
classic.
and I stand on the, I can't
That's
walk.
the classic
Well, I think that
symptoms.
when I started having one thing that helped me was heel cups. I got like a support, like an not really an arch, but like heel cups.
Yeah.
That kind of took some of the weight and helps different support it.
That's the classic symptom.
I need to go to the doctor.
Well, the thing is, they can't do much for you.
And then just like soft tissue treatments. That's like I go to like mine are my hips, and so I go to a chiropractor. I think of it like my auto mechanic for my legs.
Yeah.
So because I run a lot, and so I go to him every 2 weeks now. So every other week I go and they just kind of clean everything. Go in and he digs and tears all the scar tissue. I'll tear myself up, and I go in and he tears it all up and fixes it and gets it. But they do plantar fasciitis and some of those things. He's a chiropractor. He does his center is called the Optimal Performance Center, and so essentially a lot of it's just like there'll be different places. A lot of it's more sports medicine. It's mostly a lot of it's for like athletes, so they tear themselves up. They kind of go in and do a lot of soft tissue treatments. A lot of it's like we're talking about. It's called active release techniques, where they like push
For a while and then
and
just.
and they kind of like move. They go get you. And they go through as the break up scar tissue and the idea is to heal the soft tissues.
Yeah, but for that plantar, they'll tell you to wear some sort of insert in your shoot that provides a little more arch support. And then like they did ultrasound for the same kind of thing, which is to generate blood flow into that damaged area. And then just tons of exercises.
And I'll bet if you would have put some like Graston, Google Graston technique, they take these metal tools, because the idea is they want to draw blood to the area, because the blood brings in what's supposed to heal your body. It's not naturally healing, so they will literally do things to bruise you, so that the blood gets drawn through that area.
What's that called?
Graston, Graston. And he
That's
pulls
what
it.
they use the ultrasound for.
The first time he rolled out, it was like, that's what it looked like. Like, you ever watch Dexter? You watch TV show Dexter?
Yeah.
Okay, you know how Dexter would open up his tools?
Yeah.
That's what, I mean, he rolls out
Oh,
the tools,
God.
it's all this, it's this metal instruments.
You're talking about magnesia,
Yeah.
Strasbourg sock.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah.
Cured mine.
Have those too.
Absolutely.
The Strasbourg.
Strasbourg sock. It's this crazy thing. You have to, I mean, I hate wearing socks to bed, especially if you have to sleep in this thing. It comes up and it has a Velcro strap that it, basically what it's doing is it's stretching your plantar fascia tendon as you rest. And you, I mean, you can't really, but I wore that for a year, cause I run many marathons and, I mean, I couldn't run. I was in so much pain.
That's what
And,
happened to me.
but I wore it for about a year. It took about a year to really totally get rid of it, but I haven't had it since.
Usually you
And
feel
so
it
it's,
heel,
Do you still use the sock?
but sometimes you'll feel it in the heel.
I used it for about a year.
They sell like all the running stores sell those socks.
And it is so
they're so funny
brutal.
looking. And the first time you put it on and you're laying in bed, you're like, okay,
Yeah,
this is
I
ridiculous.
know. And you get used to it.
It's not fun, it works. I mean, I can do it
I've
until the
done it.
difference after he's done. I feel it feels a lot better after he's done. Like I was there last week and he said, well, we haven't done this for a little while. We probably need to go ahead and and he did. It feels better this week. But
They show like a box of these like metal tools.
About that ain't right.
I know.
It does work.
Yeah, I prefer the ultrasound.
I think because he did the grass, the first time he did the grass technique and then did ultrasound to kind of help clear some of it up and do some of it too. And he's like, you might want to look at you can look at how my bruising went and told me he gave me some diet tips and how to, because he's like, my bruising look easy also. I think it's not really easy. I know what you did to cause that.
You just put me through
Yeah,
torture.
I know exactly what you did to me.
Okay, on we go. So, strand 7. If I remember right, the yellows we kept. The yellows was what we were keeping. So, this, yeah, it looks greenish,
Okay.
but
There's
that's
some
yellow.
green in there as well, though.
Yeah,
Yes,
Like
I
from
don't
an
know
adult,
why.
we added the from an adult
that's right.
guidance.
That's right.
Right, but it's green because we were still questioning, do we wanna keep it in there or not? So it was questionable. Some people said, let's
Oh,
keep
I
from an adult,
Oh,
some
that's
people
right.
didn't. But, so
I thought we added from an adult because then, in terms of assessments, it would not be independent, assessed as an
Right.
independent,
I could.
so we wanted them to still be teaching it. Is that?
Patrick, I think you were the one that was unsure about from an adult.
Oh, I think my only concern would be is who that adult is.
Oh, that's, I remember.
That
that
was right.
conversation.
And I think we used the term adult because we didn't want to say just teacher, because it could be a parent coming in or being as I recall.
And we
You did say-
tried,
I don't think you wanted to use parent either because you were worried, someone was worried about,
What if they don't have
you know,
parents?
like a guardian or.
That's right. So I think that's why the term adult.
But even parent, even an adult,
You were,
I'm even good at, you know, I think it could be okay. I just think we gotta be careful because, you know, I said there's a lot of kids that may not have that adult. That's why we were talking about earlier at lunch, we were talking about how our ESOL students become resource, because at times our resource teachers do, because if the kid doesn't have someone at home that can help them with projects, they become that. So I just want, you know, we have to be careful with who that adult is. But I wouldn't even say if they're even just went with guidance and support. I you know, that needs a little bit more openness, but I guess still the same. I can see some teachers reading that, and I can even say as a school district, if someone were to say, well, who's gonna offer that support? The teacher's supposed to be working, is that coming from a small group? Can it be a TA? What if we don't have a TA? Who's gonna, then you start getting into lots of different.
So that's why that's in green, because there's a question about it. And
And the desire to have from an adult was to provide the instructional support, the idea I think that you were just saying,
that we need scaffolding
yeah,
in this piece.
right.
We can't just assume kids can do this on their own. And if it's on here, some teachers will just look at that and assume that that's for kids to do independently. And we didn't want that. Okay, so that is A. Identify, select, analyze, evaluate resources. Then we talked about in a glossary, because there's a lot of stuff underneath that. In a glossary, here's some sources that we might put in a glossary. And why these are green, I can't remember. I was hoping somebody would remember that. We added that and we talked about it. And so here's some glossary pieces that we're just pulling from down below. And we nixed all of these red ones, we completely nixed. And I can't read those as they stand.
Because we combined them into the,
Right.
into one.
Yes. And these green ones here, I wish they were, I don't know why it's not coming out very good on the color. Can I read those?
Identify visual, graphic, you know about the green one, and auditory aids, posters, and recordings.
It's bigger, but
You know about the green or the red? The red one I can't quite.
Yeah.
read.
Yeah, red, I can't read it at all.
yeah, identify, I can tell you what the red is, because I've got a different copy of it here. The red was identify primary and secondary sources, diaries, letters, people, interviews, journals, photos.
Have you been keeping Laura and Julie updated?
This is the first time we.
I was wondering how you were summarizing all the
Yes,
other conversations.
no, I haven't. So, when all of this was in that at the top. So then when we went down to, we combined a lot of that together. So now we have C where it's identify opinion, bias, but that doesn't come in until 5th grade. So we didn't really mess with that. Use technological tools was the question. So it's in green. We included technological tools up top. And so there's nothing in technological tools until you get to 5, and that was for presentation.
Is that grade 5, right?
Yes. Then develop a research plan and identify resources. We went through all of those, and we actually went through that one, and we had apply, and then this was outline and list described. So we actually went through and changed the verbiage on that one to fit what we're doing for kindergarten. Let me go back over here and see what's in red. And we talked about, there's a point of view up above. This one is support a point of view, and it only happens in the 5th grade. I can,
No, 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 no.
Floating.
How did we move that to C,
yes,
right?
we moved that to C. And you don't have it?
Well, it just doesn't show up on the doc. I mean, no, I have it, but I don't have the color coding. Maybe it's still loading.
I That's it, it's still there. But it's shown.
Oh, I see what happened. We still have, it ended up that, never mind. Tools of social science inquiry, now is it over the overarching label on every,
When we
I remember.
pulled it
now.
over, it came over.
I
um,
gotcha.
Yes, that's
So
what.
you're way down here.
Yes, I'm at page
I
41.
gotcha.
Now I'm on page 20. The paper says 29 and 30, but I think it's actually, but yeah, 29 and 30. Find it.
There it is.
Okay. So the question is, do we need to do anything else to strand 7? Are there pieces that we need to add, or we've got all of like A continued is 3 or 4 different places. If you look at it, you might find it. A continued is 3 or 4 different places. And so we put them all up in here in like a glossary is what, and that was really Laura suggesting we do that. To clean this up and get them off of here. Just to put that into a glossary. Are we good with that? We want to stick with that, or?
The glossary being right there, or you're saying
A
you're gonna put
separate
it
glossary.
later on, okay.
What was our conversation last time? What are y'all thinking? By doing it the way we've got it, we are basically done with that. From an adult was a question we had, and
Was much changed? I mean, this is the first time I've seen it, there was a lot of change.
we moved around some, and we changed the verbiage, but we pushed it down from grade 2 to grade K.
So you're asking them a lot, having a separate glossary, you're saying like, so have this, then have another page with just glossary that defines things?
Right. That helps define.
What do you think of the teacher, how's that?
I think it'd be more beneficial than going through all this and looking.
Listing each and every
Yeah.
time.
I mean, because then you get a document like we have, that's, 50 pages or whatever. If we could get rid of a bunch of that extra garbage and make it easier to read.
There were some things in, New York lays out social studies practices before they lay out the grade level standards, so they have practices for each, and we do like, they have a kind of a strand, I guess, on chronological reasoning and causation, so that they go backwards in terms of time. Well, actually, I'll start with kindergarten. So kindergarten, they have identify causes and effects using an example from his or her family life. Identify causes and effects using example. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Sorry, it's down here. Still under that same strand of chronological reasoning and causation. So kindergarten has identified change over time in his her life. First grade is identified change over time in his her family. And then second is identified change over time in his her community, and then it goes on to recognize continuity and change over periods of time for third, and then fourth is recognize dynamics of historical continuity and change over periods of time. And I thought that's kind of missing in terms of we kind of like throw timelines in there at the end without a build up in some ways.
Right. Where do we have timelines? Remember?
It's at the
B.
end. It doesn't come in until 4th grade.
Well, as full of social science inquiry, it's in a concept B, knowledge to create various social studies, maps, and graphics.
Let me see that.
Right here,
Is that it?
That's a good one.
this,
No, down below, right there, create maps, graphs, timelines, charts.
And so it falls under the concept, instead of a concept that's built around chronological passage of time,
use of
history.
sources.
Here it's to create, knowledge to create various social studies, maps and graphics is the concept. So it's a different concept. You see,
Mhm.
because what the way they use it is it's under the concept of the passage of time.
I
That,
think
that
that's
doesn't
missing from-
exist here. That doesn't exist here.
That, so do we need to add it in social studies inquiry?
I don't know, I think it's I think it's a missing piece
Right, so
somewhere.
does that fit in one of these? Or is that really social study inquiry to look at how time changes?
How things change over time.
Right, thank you.
Well, yeah, I know, I'm thinking of economics, and how does that fit geography? How does
kind
it
of goes
talk
through
about?
everything.
Does it
Just
speak to
over time.
governance?
Economy.
I just think it's
Culture
thrown,
change
I
over
think it's
time.
thrown in there, this, because I think time passage is a hard thing developmentally. But I don't see anywhere where we're building up that foundation for it. We just have wham, make a timeline in fourth grade. That,
Well, on my chart, not the Google Doc, but on my chart that we were talking and I was doing it on the Word doc, we have this one in red because we said it was covered in geography. Or it's covered in one of them. We redded that one out. Oh, no, it's included above.
in the sources.
It's included, yes, it's right above that, look right above that.
Yeah, because all of these are primary or secondary
Yes,
sources.
so it's included right here. There's
I see that.
timelines and here's
Right.
charts.
Identify.
Right. So that's why we read it B out, because it fit under visual tools.
Right.
Move things around to what wanting to do or adding
No,
or
we
replacing.
only did it on here. We didn't do it on that.
Relationship to the individual groups.
I love what you're saying. I think that needs to be,
Summarized. I don't know.
Well, that is that's the other side of the placemat. What you're talking about is on,
Yeah, you're right. Some of it.
you're talking about goal, 1.19 is part of that past and present societies,
Yes.
identify, analyze, compare. But do we need to include it under inquiry and then decide if it needs to go somewhere else?
Because it's interesting, that's not even what the standard, it's 1.8 is what's listed under it. So 1.8, organized data, information, and ideas.
But 9 is really where we're looking at past and present.
Because I think we missed out on that piece a lot because it's not articulated somewhere, that there's constant comparison of the past and present. Which I think is part of where relevancy is. Why is this important? We keep repeating the same thing over and over.
So read that to me again. What you got from
So there's like 5 different ones. Identify change over time in his or her life, that's kindergarten. Identify change over time in his or her family. Identify changes over time in his or her community. Recognize continuity and change over periods of time. Recognize dynamics of historical continuity and change over periods of time.
and listen, they're only recognizing. I mean, it's lower level verbiage.
So do you see this as a concept? A social science inquiry concept?
A passage of time.
Because
Or is that under his history?
right,
That's what I was saying, that's what I was
That's-
saying.
yeah,
a
that's-
little minute ago. I said maybe that is part of the
because I'm going back and looking at the GLEs, the social tools of social science inquiry, that's part, I'm looking at the concepts that have already been laid out. So the first one is identify, select the resources. B is create and use resources. Then C is understanding fact opinion bias. D is using technology tools. So these are like big skills concepts. E is develop a research plan. F is interpreting various social studies resources, which there's nothing there, and it seems kind of redundant because I think we're relevant. And then support G is supporting a point of view. So the way this is laid out is that we have these like big concepts of what social science inquiry is made up of. And it's identifying resources, it's creating resources, and using them. It's backed in opinion, using technological tools, which is kind of crazy on its own.
I think it's probably more history, but it's missing the concept.
It's research plan and supporting a point of view. So when you think of what do you engage in social science inquiry, I'm trying to think, is there something missing? And is the passage of chronological time a social science inquiry, or is that a history inquiry specific?
I think it sounds history. I think that's the entire, I think that's what history actually is. The study of how things how they so the study of it, but that's, we're looking back at something that happened in the past and looking at how they either changed or how it's different or how it led to something that's now. What it was.
How did we get here?
Right.
So it's a historical thinking practice.
Yeah.
So economically, do we look at,
Yes.
But when we look at the history of
economics.
Right.
If you're
It's the
thinking
history of economics.
right,
It's not economic itself. The
Right.
economy.
we're not looking at scarcity. We're looking at the history of,
you might find examples of
Right.
scarcity from the past, even, and how.
Right.
Which I mean, people might call trends or something.
Right.
In a way, yeah, you are.
yes. Okay, so we need to add that when we get to history probably.
Yeah, make sure that in the history strand that we're scaffolding that skill, right? That
Right.
chronology skill.
Yes,
And not just saying fourth grade, okay, now make time.
right,
I
so,
do think that it does help with some of it, because what you then start to look at is, okay, so if I'm a person in this, all these areas simultaneously, how has where I'm at now changed over this period of time, whether it's how has the state of Missouri, what is different about the state of Missouri now than it was in 1600, than it was in 1800, than it was so it allows some a bigger, you know, they can start to, it does kind of start to make some of those abstract concepts.
So if we go back to tools of social science inquiry, what is social science inquiry? It's looking at selecting the right resources, being able to use them, creating some,
Right.
interpreting them, and distinguishing fact, opinion, bias. That's also part of interpreting them, I would say. But here it's broken out. They said using technological tools. I think we all agree that children should probably be able to do that earlier than 5th grade, where it currently stands. Doing a research plan. I think the last time we talked about that we thought children should be doing research earlier because actually it doesn't even appear.
We laid it out though, it's
Yeah,
just down
yeah.
lower
So that's in
somewhere.
there. Supporting a point of view.
And we have technological,
We moved 5, right, didn't we? I have it written down that we moved supporting a point of view up to C,
That makes sense.
right?
That makes sense. Yep. So are there any other like tools of social science inquiry that you would think of? It's everything from looking at evidence essentially and evaluating and then creating other evidence from it.
so the question is, what do you do with D? Technological tools.
Do we know what that meant by that? When they did that?
Well, it says use technological tools for research and presentation.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
internet and PowerPoint.
yeah,
Is what
internet and PowerPoint, absolutely.
10 years ago is what we would
Yeah.
have seen in a classroom.
And now we might expand it to Google Earth, but it's still internet.
Right. Or we're going to do much more in PowerPoint. We're going to do
The question comes back to, is it really, is it listed as a separate tool of inquiry any longer, or is it just what is being done?
That's a very good point.
right. That's the question.
Did we include,
Like, yeah, just one, but yes.
digital?
Please do. I mean,
Because otherwise,
use technology tools, yes.
because otherwise it won't.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause I'm not sure you can actually, I get very concerned about trying to list what that is,
Yeah.
because then you're starting to predict the future. And I'm not sure what, because if this was, say, these is, when were these last looked at? Might have been a while since these were last looked at, so let's say it's another 7 years. In 2007, there's probably a lot of things we currently are able to use now that they weren't able to. I mean, you're gonna look at districts, now they're using bring your own device, that are using different things, so you've got kids that are using all kinds of different stuff.
What we have up in the glossary, electronic resources, is listed starting at grade K.
I just don't know why you would need to keep it in there first. As a separate bullet point.
Cause they're using it to present, right?
To research and present.
No,
So could that be
added in
part
more
of, yeah,
develop a research plan, identify resources for.
If we include the electronic component, does that force it upon the school district potentially, or is it that way? The reason I asked, I recently
you're
read an
right.
article about why Steve Jobs didn't allow his
Has
kids to have an
kids to
iPad.
have-
Have
I
you
saw
ever read that?
Oh, yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of other research, even growing research around that whole arena. Oh, you did? Okay. So, just a thought, I mean, if we say it,
Then the expectation is that they should be doing that.
so, is that something we want to say? Granted, I don't think by us not saying it, it won't preclude classrooms from pulling up the iPad and using whatever resources they have available. But if we say it,
Right.
does it have a little bit of force behind it, where people say, oh, I have to be doing this? And, I mean, maybe there's a teacher out there that thinks like Steve Jobs, and is able to teach effectively. So I don't know. Potentially put those constraints in somebody, thinking that we're doing a good thing.
Right.
but what I do think is missing though is so 5 steps of a research plan, that I want kids to share that information with someone in some form, and whether it's electronically or not electronically, I don't care, but I want them to show what they know. that part of it, I think, is missing,
Cause I mean,
because
like the
it's a separate
electronics,
strand.
then it's gonna be just like whole conversation, you know, on the road here, this session and beyond, about student data and intellectual property for students, and, you know, so on and so forth. And so if we're communicating at this level, that the expectation is that you use, you know, electronics or something like that, that's gonna feed that discussion up there potentially. There's gonna be another student data bill, you know, that comes down the pike, if not more, to protect student data, by the way. Then there's a whole conversation, well, if you have student data, i.e. they write a paper, that paper then gets uploaded into the cloud, they wouldn't lose their ownership over it. You know, I mean, and there's the student use, if you're like, you know, agreements, all this other sort of stuff. There's a whole broader conversation that's occurring. I guess I'm thinking maybe we ought to let that conversation occur, you know, rather than saying from our level, hey, we expect you to use iPads and, you know, they're gonna use them anyway. Do we need to say that there's the expectation?
We can take, if you take technology out, add somewhere in where students are sharing, presenting information, sharing information.
We don't have present anywhere in here.
There's got, and I agree, I think there's a lot of power behind having a student have to at least talk with someone else about what they've just learned. The speaking and listening component of it needs to be a piece of it too. So that presenting, whether it's presenting to the whole class, presenting to someone else, presenting to just the teacher, I think that talking about their learning, things like that is something that we have to put in there somehow.
So D might be modified to drop out the technology, because I think they should also be researching. And so this just says use technological tools for research and presentation. The other, so it could either be modified that it's there, or we could add presentation to E, which is developing a research plan and identifying resources. I'm not sure we want to do that either. Because I think there's a lot of power in presentation and presenting something.
Just like a verbal presentation or conversation, something like that, I agree.
Yep.
But we would want them to use their sources, whatever they are, as part of that presentation. So I wonder if that's how it would then.
So could you add it in B, develop and present the research plan and identify resources? Or would that, is that too broad in that section?
Yeah, I almost want to make it a separate concept of research and presentation that would follow after developing a research plan.
Well, I think the reason it's not there, because goal 2.1 says plan, make written, oral, and visual presentations.
Oh, it's on the other side of the
Right.
placemat.
So
Okay.
on multiple ones of these, it has 2.1, 2.1, 2.1. So they're assuming you're gonna turn it over and read 2.1, which means that's a presentation.
Now, didn't,
This isn't
I
even
didn't-
easy to find on the web.
I was gonna say,
It
did I
isn't.
discuss
It's hard-
that
it's
most
hardly-
teachers don't even know what
Yes.
this is?
Yes,
They learned about it in undergrad, so
You know,
some have.
maybe.
but if we're thinking about the concepts of social science inquiry, doing research and presenting your findings is a fundamental tool of social science inquiry. And it's funny, it's not here.
Right, because it's on the other side.
Yeah.
Cause in every subject area, you're gonna be required.
So I guess I would be in
Right.
favor of
Yes.
adding it as a concept.
I would too.
And whether we want to modify D or whether we just want to create a new one, whatever. Because I hear you talking about the technological tool.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would put a qualifier on it.
I'd say we take D out. Change D to something about presentation, and teachers will float towards technology. I mean, that's, in today's society, we say presentation, hardly anyone does posters. Some do, but we're having kids do technology presentations for those districts who can.
I know that just from a parent perspective, I would prefer taking that out because my kids, I mean, they don't have their own personally identifiable way to get on the internet, or they don't do anything that attaches their stuff, anything to them personally. Just we do that for protection's sake, for identity's sake. But it doesn't make them my kid, you know, I mean, the teacher trying to get my kid to convince me to let them do those things. I mean, it may come, you know, some of that comes naturally, but it doesn't have the sense that we expect this of how you would do everything. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I'll tell you a funny story. That's a spits this. My ninth grader has read a book about War of 1812 about the White House burning. So he's doing a book report presentation. She'd written a paper, doing a presentation of it. He asked me, Dad, what do you think of this presentation? Which normally doesn't even involve me, but he needed it the next day. So it's like, help me with this real quick. So I suggest, it's just facts. You know, slide after slide of facts. He'd have 12 slides, so he was trying to stretch it out. You know, so he said, I said, son, wouldn't it be cool if you put in like a 2-minute video shot of like White House Down, or one of those movies where the White House is just blowing up, something really awful, and then ask the class and have a short discussion on, has this really ever happened in history? Yeah, Independence Day. Yeah. So has this ever really happened in history?
I was like, which one was it?
I said, think how cool that would be. And he looked at me and he says, Dad, the goal is to make it as boring as possible where you don't wake them up. Okay.
I think I had the business teacher.
Yeah.
Exactly.
He said, they're already asleep. I'm not going to make this interesting.
Always.
Oh, like, son. So, he was using technological skills, but not very technological.
What if we use a new concept, add a new concept called something like conducting research and presentations?
Just develop that method technology. I think that's.
Because it's missing right now. We say create a research plan.
But they don't actually.
How about if we do presentation of research? Because we've already told them to conduct research.
And
Well,
the
it's developing a
locating
research
instead of
plan.
identifying being.
It's not actually doing it. Yeah.
So it actually reads develop research plan, but it doesn't actually say do research.
Right.
That's probably.
Well, it doesn't necessarily say put together a research paper and present it.
In fact, there's nothing in it for developing a research plan, although we added something, right?
No, E is develop. Did we change them?
No,
He is developing a research plan and identifying resources.
there's just nothing
In it.
And A, or kindergarten is ask questions and find answers about a topic with the citizens.
E should be locating, identifying.
Oh, but
Developing.
in what we've changed already, we've actually fleshed out E.
He starts at kindergarten now.
So that was,
Yes,
I
it's
found
on
this-
Google Docs.
that was in the afternoons when you went to when you left.
when I.
Yeah,
ran
Party,
into
yeah, when-
the-
yes.
Yeah, you were.
While you were partying,
Then that would make more
So
sense.
then,
if
this
it's
is
not
it,
blank.
so then we add the presentation to
Yes.
that rewrite it.
Can I remember?
Is this, I don't think this is.
no, but I can email this one. So here it is. Ask questions and.
You don't have to
answers.
email it right now.
Okay.
Just-
But, so E goes all the way down.
Until they
Okay.
actually do research.
Where,
Yes,
Outline the
yes.
steps and use a
Right.
research plan.
right, that's on very cool.
But the presentation
Probably
part's
should be
still missing.
developing and carrying out developing, carrying out, and presenting a research plan. Could that be that, what comes under E,
becomes-
the first column?
Are they
Okay,
presenting the plan?
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
if we're gonna get very
Develop-
semantic for you, but,
No, it's a good point.
yeah, they may not develop.
Yeah.
If they're developing
Developing
a
a
research
research
plan,
plan.
then they're actually researching.
and identifying
And then they're-
resources.
They're presenting on product with that
Right.
research.
So maybe we change the wording of the concept again back to something like conducting research and presentations, but we leave the steps, the scaffolded steps,
So
the same.
conducting, so just conducting and presenting research.
Okay, conducting. I'm typing on this other document, I'll put it up there just a second, I'm trying to get it. Conducting and
I put
presenting,
conducting research and presentations.
conducting and presenting research.
But as a separate
We're trying to make it good.
In
Or
place of what it
changing
says, E, developing a research plan and identifying resources, it could be conducting research and presentations.
How important do you feel even the word presentation is? Because I can see, I don't know if it's sharing out, because what I'm afraid of is that every grade level is gonna read when I think presentations, I'm thinking kids standing up in front of class and you're doing 25 presentations and you're taking multiple time frames.
Sharing.
But would that be the descriptor under
I
that
think-
first column, but then
yeah.
you're articulating
I think it would be,
maybe K and one or share?
right, I was thinking,
Right.
could they share out information? Just because if we start to lay that out, I just know from a teacher perspective, when I see presentations, that means there goes 3 days worth of lessons.
Yes, I would agree with you.
Because that means every kid's gonna have to wait for every kid, I gotta come up with a rubric for sharing out all that information. And I've gotta come up, we gotta do all these things just to go through that, where what we really want is kids to research, can they share it out written as they get older? Can they share it with a partner? Can they share it, there's different ways to share out, so I'm just wondering if we wanna be careful with the word presentation.
So these are all ing verbs.
Or maybe
So,
That's why I say
presentation needs to be in the glossary.
so is it
Conducting
only
research
conducting
Defining it.
and presenting research with appropriate resources? Because isn't this all about resources? I mean, that's fine.
And then to Patrick's concern, I think within the grade level, the K 1, 2, 3, 4, how that's specified can give some guidance into whether we're talking about a stand and deliver or whether we're talking about even presenting at all. Maybe at kindergarten we don't want to present, or maybe it's a sharing.
Right, it may be something they write and it hangs in the hall.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's you want something that they're sharing
So
what they
kindergarten,
learned, just
instead of
as
saying,
that final piece.
You know, what presenting means is to share.
But at fifth grade,
It
I
should
want
be
them to
presented,
work.
not understand and deliver.
And I would go all the above. I think if it, I don't know exactly what that research project is or exactly, and so I think that some of that, I would want the teacher to have autonomy over that.
Mhm.
And so if the teacher decides that the best way for them to share it out is to meet the goal of what their stated goal is for them to do it this way, then I'm gonna do it that way. But I could also see them combining it with a writing project in fifth grade and not necessarily giving a presentation, but doing a paper about it. And so they're now taking what they've written and doing a paper. So that's, you know, I'd want to almost give some, I don't know what the word needs to be,
I can't think of another word either.
Under goal two, where it says plan and make written, oral, and visual presentations for writing purposes and all.
Visual, written, or either, you know, rather, you know, use what you could be, so it gives them that something that could be planned and prepared, visual, written, or oral presentation, then it does give some different options.
That'd be fun.
I don't want to put it in there, but I even like it says for
For different purposes.
audiences, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can present it to a student.
Yeah,
Or
so
you
do
can
we
present it to
do,
the school.
do we just put 2.1 underneath it? So here's what while you're talking, here's what I'm thinking through. So here's conducting and presenting research with appropriate resources. In kindergarten, we've asked them to, where's that one? Ask questions and find answers about a topic with assistance. So does that look like share findings with partners about a topic?
I think it could. I mean, you have, if you read little Johnny or Susie a story about George Washington or George Washington as a boy, and then ask them, hey, can you just tell us what we were right about? Can you just tell me about the story we just read?
But part of that also might
And that would be a
be,
presentation, right?
Yeah.
well, by the end of kindergarten,
Can we take out with partners?
Share, which could be partner work, which
Could be partners, it could be just a share findings about a time, about.
Could be non-fiction.
About a topic.
There you go.
you could be sharing it anyway.
And then you have 2.1, if you wanna put 2.1 underneath it, it does enlist, visual, oral, all those things.
So Say that again.
But like wherever you put the 2.1, it lists some of those more specific things, or we have
Yes,
a glossary.
yes.
I think sharing findings to me sounds different than, I think it gives me more options, just the language of it than same presentation, but that
Right.
might just be my own.
Well,
schema.
you've got presenting research over here, and we're scaffolding up to that. And then what's it say in grade 2? List the steps and use appropriate, use a
It
research plan.
indicates writing is involved, I think.
Yes.
So could it be? Could it be share findings, including in writing about a topic? Share research about a topic in writing.
Could be. I'm just gonna type in, just gonna look at it. Share.
Research about a topic in writing.
We're not asking
This
how.
is the part of what yellow will look like too.
Right.
On yours, you've got that thing on the far right where you can find it, where you have on Independence is created, where you guys had the connections table. Where did you just pull that language straight off of their document? Like where did you get that language in that format?
Well, we took the ELA standards and then determined what the district, when we would do narrative, opinion,
But the language matches what's on their
what's on
document.
the standards.
Was it these standards, like GLE standards, or was it the?
Oh, you mean
Independence
that?
curriculum?
No, it's just genre, that's all that's listed there. So I think it says research and then informational writing.
Okay, if we do 5th grade.
Right.
Present
Right.
research.
Yes, let's do that.
Present research to an audience.
Varied audiences, what something said, didn't it?
To the various audiences.
To various audiences.
Variety of purposes and audiences.
Okay. About, or is that it? It's not about, it's research is already in there, right?
I mean, I'll say that to me, I read that, I think I could get multiple presentations.
Which is fine by me.
But do we want every kid to be giving multiple presentations?
But various audiences mean they may give it to a whole class audience, and they may do some research and give that in small group audiences.
If I do one research project, by now, the expectation would be that I'm gonna deliver that one research project to multiple.
Gotcha, I see what you're saying.
Variety still means design still.
It's a,
Audiences being plural, does that mean that we're gonna do this one research project and we're gonna present it multiple times? or-
do they have to present to a parent group, to a teacher
Right.
group, to a student group, and to
Right.
a
And
community?
maybe that's just from my lens, and I see
Right,
someone say that to me, I'd be
It's,
thinking,
it's, so it's a language, it's a sentence formation
Right.
issue.
Or you can do multiple research projects.
Right.
And what we mean is that they wanna have an option of audiences. What we're trying to do is create wording, so that means that they have an option of what an audience means.
Could it
Did they not think that themselves?
present research to a target audience?
You said
That's what it said.
present research to an audience? Would they not think, oh, that means either this or this or this or this? To have
Right.
to say, I mean,
And we could quotation mark it here, if we wanted, with suggestions. example given. If we want them.
Are we being,
Or just leave it
are
obvious.
we being too much? What if it just said,
Present research to an audience.
what if it even, yeah, or
Just
Yeah,
present
just
research.
leave it,
present research?
or just present
And let the
research.
teacher determine what that looks like for their class.
And I would say, if anything, using, you know, like, even just that language, you present research using oral, written, verbal, whatever, oral, written, whatever it was.
Visual.
Present research orally, visually.
Present research.
Well, we also want them to conduct and present the research.
Right, so we,
The conduct is already up there somewhere. It's in the
yes,
others.
conduct is, but we wrote it in this one.
Yeah.
But it's actually, it says, right, but use
Yeah, it says
technological tools for research and presentation.
So that's when we exonate.
Oh, okay.
So it
We
would be,
go, we say conducting and present. So I think you're right.
Are
need
we
to have-
moving the other down there then? That will become one, the other research.
the other one is developing a research plan.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting rid of the
Can-
top part of that.
Are we,
Yeah.
should what we actually be saying is pretty much exactly, I almost can see this being exactly the same language across the board, and then what actually ends up changing would be the way that it's assessed. What the teacher's expectations are in order to be a proficient presentation would be different. Like I'm worried about saying put it in writing, because that means there's only one option there. It's like we're limiting some of the teachers' ability to, depending on what they're actually doing, they may not want to do a writing. It may be, I don't know, I just think we could say present the research.
Well,
I think
I'm
fine.
debating it.
Because it's almost 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Put a timer on it.
What's that
And we're
timer,
done.
man?
It's gonna get a little darker and a little darker. Okay, how about conduct and present research to an audience using appropriate sources? That's what the standard says. And at 5th grade, we've reached the standard. So how do we scaffold that down to 4th grade?
Or do we do what Patrick said, just use the same one over and over and over again?
I think the word that we could use and the rationale for it is the word appropriate.
That's what I was thinking.
So,
Because appropriate for kindergartner is different for what's appropriate for a 5th grader.
Until it becomes the same one over and over again. And like you
does
said,
that
it
scare,
wasn't
but we've
appropriate
not
in
asked
kindergarten.
kindergarten to conduct research. We've not asked them to do that.
Right, so we
So
might
we have to
drop,
look down
What if
here.
you-
See, here we've
Yeah.
got kids list, describe, and use the steps in research. So this is the first time we've actually used research on a,
and so before that, it's just presenting.
right, we're just really looking at, we're having kids read a paragraph, read something, look through a trade book, and then talk with a neighbor, add to the class understanding, build an anchor chart. I mean, those are the kinds of things we're talking there.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say too.
Trade book,
What's that?
trade book.
Like a storybook.
It can be,
Children's
it could be that, it could be, there's a lot, now they've actually got like graphic novels that fit into this, they've got all kinds of
It's
stuff. that
basically
can be-
like with children's literature usually,
Trade book is children's literature.
Yes.
basically.
not a textbook.
Yes.
It's
It's
the
something
opposite.
smaller than a
I mean,
Yeah.
I could even consider something like Time for Kids.
Right.
Some of those things aren't necessarily a trade book, but it's something that
But
applies some of the similar
Children's
concepts.
literature magazine.
Yeah, it's just not a textbook essentially.
Okay.
Kathy,
I'm looking here.
Yeah, so we're
you
looking.
look awfully grumpy now.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just thinking hard.
Grumpy
Grumpy. It's like a whole movie now. Grumpy cat.
I think you could even leave it the way it is right there, except maybe share findings about a topic. Essentially, it's just a more friendly version of conduct and present research.
And it fits with what's below developing a research plan, because
Right.
that's ask questions and find answers about a topic. So now we're gonna say, well, now you're gonna you're gonna share it.
Eventually, I mean, there could be, the way you kind of, depending on how specific, one of the other things you start getting into is, are they conducting, like, how they conduct that research plan? Is it one source? Is it multiple sources? Are they combining different things? That's where it starts to get, you know.
That's where it's hard not to know what ELA is doing because and currently it designates the number of sources
Right.
in the targets. So
Which is kinda nice.
So does it appear that the one that we're missing is this one, right?
It's third grade. And we put in writing on second grade, do we wanna take that off?
I would, but that's just me. I'm more likely to wanna give more teacher discretion than less.
Uh-huh. Which share findings and share research are two different things.
there's something in the second grade,
We're looking at
E,
Yes.
there's
I
something,
looked
the
at it
word
while
missing
ago.
or something.
Yeah, I looked at it while ago and thought there's something missing. I wasn't worried about anything.
Hmm.
I think if you replaced and with by, so it read, list the steps and use a research plan by.
Identify resources.
So list the steps of a research plan and identify appropriate resources for conducting this investigation. Or is identifying appropriate resources part of?
Well, should we have a semicolon?
Well,
And a research
yeah,
plan,
It was from the previous instruction of that concept.
right? Should we list the steps and use a research plan, semicolon, identify appropriate resources for investigating?
I don't think deep into it is grammatical skill toolbox, there is a semicolon.
I'm trying.
The ones I don't use very much.
So,
So if, in the
Oh,
one where
that's
we're
why it's
missing
got
here,
witnesses.
what grade is this?
Third.
Third grade. So we're missing what that should be, because we're asking in E for them to describe, but I would say, well, how do you want them to describe it? In the previous ones, they're kind of listing, asking questions. So here it might be a chance where we actually talk about writing. List, describe, and use steps in a research plan. But at some point they gotta start writing, right? So we could. And they're using the steps in a research plan. So I think the conduct and present research to an audience using appropriate sources works.
Keep the same thing.
Yeah, I think
you're
it
right.
works there.
Based off of E,
Yeah,
that works.
I think that works.
Okay. Okay, so are we done with? Okay, so we're good with these? We'll make them.
So, as
has a first full draft in it.
I don't know what color we use for this. Alright, so tomorrow then our plan will be to start at 8 and
Right here.
yes. And split up, talk about, determine how we're going to do the next pieces.
Forgive me, what are the next pieces?
We have 6 other strands.
Okay.
So this is strand 7.
We've yet to begin to climb the mountain. No, that's not true. We've said.
I think we can stay together. I will discuss it tomorrow, understand, but I don't think we're ready yet.
Just split up.
I agree.
I like staying together because you guys are smarter than I am. That helps.
It's a pretty manageable size group too, so that was not worth it too.
The other part was we're missing at least, what, three probably?
Yeah.
So missing a third of the people or the people that are here. So we're not sure which group they would wanna be on and some of those things too, so.
Did you fix the wording on that section grade one in the other document? Fix the wording on that section grade.
Yeah, my daughter's playing. She's on
Where
the freshman
was-
team.
Is she?
It's under E.
14 and 11.
And Lafayette?
Yeah.
List
So
of
they're the
use
only
and
Lafayette
steps.
team still in the tournament. Everyone else
Is
got
Jim Porter still the head coach?
I think that's
Is
the
it?
spot.
new guy.
No, no,
I can't tell
Let's
you.
do that.
I just can't remember. It's not
Who's
her.
the freshman coach?
She teaches, she's the head coach for Phil Funky, Lance.
Oh,
That's
okay.
better.
Listen, Lance. She was a PE teacher at Crestview.
And she's a PE teacher there too.
Where's Lafayette? What kind of,
Wildwood, Glencoe.
I know
I'm like,
everything.
could we on all
I've
of
been
them?
to all the others.
Instant
I've been to
application.
some,
List,
So
like, so
You
like
really
second
can't
grade,
into,
you list and use the steps
Chesterfield.
Marquette.
in a research
Marquette.
plan, comma,
So they play Marquette
identify
tonight.
the appropriate resources for investigating.
The
There's something
rivalry.
about the
Yeah.
and in each of them
Yeah,
now, in
yes.
second
When I worked
grade,
at Crestview, those kids, the
doesn't
kids
flow
split.
right.
So they go to Marquette and Lafayette. So that's an interesting, those games are always fun.
And then Friday morning, I'm part of an authentic audience in a Maple River Heights project class where we work with teachers and they're seniors. They've been studying the nutritional needs of, this is in a biology class. They've been studying the nutritional deficits in South Africa where I had a group of teachers this past year to identify potential GMO products to help address those needs. And me and a guy in Monsanto coming in to listen to their research presentation like a Shark Tank. So teams and kids are coming up like Shark Tank and saying, look, let's pitch our product to you. Here's what you need to.
Be Mark Cuban.
Yeah, kind of. So that'll be fun tomorrow morning.
Roxana got you in that, didn't she?
Oh, yeah.
I can't think about Marquette, I think about Jim Gagan. Do you know Jim Gagan?
Yes.
No, when?
Yeah, I
No,
think
which
about
time?
him at an athletic directors conference one time, the speaker was doing like a Johnny Carson thing where he put it in there.
Oh,
It
yeah,
needs
yeah.
to stay
Yeah,
in,
you know,
I
Great
think
part.
about
Yeah, it
everything.
goes, see what was it?
Identify the eye is missing, or identify.
Blisters
See
in my armpits. It goes, Jim Gagan wearing cowboy boots. He had a twin, I guess, too, right?
I don't
Jim
know.
has a twin.
I don't know.
Okay. The only thing we didn't talk about is the next time we meet. And you have to leave, you need to leave right now, so,
Just send out, you guys can work with me. Because the other people aren't here either.
What do we think as regards to time frame? I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of dates, we're thinking once a month, are we thinking 6 weeks, 8 weeks?
we talked last time we were here about 6 weeks. But it seemed like January and February were hard, the rest of December for sure
December
was
was the
out.
hardest one for me. Just
Yeah,
because there's not
and
much time.
January was ridiculous for several people. When can you not do it in those months?
So I'm in DC for the NCAA conference.
NCAA, like the National Collegiate Athletic Association?
Yes, I am the faculty athletic rep for our campus. So I coordinate between our athletics and our academics on campus. It's mostly problem solving. Anyone who has a problem. So it's fun. We do all right. Actually, our student athletes have a higher GPA and graduate sooner than our non-student athletes.
Especially the small, that's the way they want to do it.
We have a 93%
Other than
graduation.
Other than the great big athletic, the great big powerhouses, that's.
We've won the National President's Award 4 years in a row now for academics.
Which school you with?
Maryville University, it's a private in St. Louis. So
Division two,
we're Division II. We're the ranked number 1 in the country in wrestling in Division II this year.
In the conference,
GOBC.
stuff, yeah.
Okay, I think we're done. And
Hey, Jim.
we'll see you at 8 in the morning, and you're gonna give me Dave food?
Yep.
Okay,
All right.
I think we're good.
That's right.